seconds.
Okay, okay, okay. I believe you should be able to hear me now. I believe so. Let me know if you can hear me. Um, Adoda, can you hear me? So, hello, hello, hello. I hope everyone is doing well. Oh my gosh, that is so funny. Oh, I love the unicorn because see, I compare my puppy, my eldest one, Chloe. I always compare like to me she just seems like Mew, like a unicorn, like very much in that like that whole type of realm of things, right? Kind of like extraordinary. Um, and so I've always tried to you know, think like I have this little unicorn plush that I always take with me when I'm gonna be away from her, because of the fact that I'm like really I kind of find the need to just have that comfort of knowing that she's there, um, especially when I can't, like when I go for conferences or something. I know it's probably people would probably say that's really dumb or whatever, but again, it's just like um, it's my puppy. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, like back then, like unicorns were talked about all the time. I mean, like even in the Jewish Bible, it talks about unicorns, and I've never really, understood, um, kind of like why, like I mean, as a kind of ideal, I guess, as a kind of idealized object or objet, as a kind of menagerie object. But I've always thought to me, like, even if they did exist, I could see them becoming extinct anyways, right? Like, not to put like a negative stamp on everything, but I'm kind of like, yeah, I feel like they're not exactly something that would be lasting for a very long time. Um, but as for Caesar and Gaul, yeah, definitely important to read that. Also, another thing too is that there's actually a really good. Uh, there have been other people that have done this video, but I know that Lonerbox did this, and I just know it because I recently saw someone responding to Lonerbox on Twitter just recently, and that was that he did a video where he talked about like the whole idea of like hard men, right? Like where does that come from? Where does that really start? And it really starts with the Romans, where like as they're conquering like Gaul and Germania Minima, right? Like they begin to, or yeah, Germania Minores, they begin to say like, oh, the Swabians were the most gallant of all, and phony box. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm trying not to like, cause any more issues with him, like as it were, like me, him, like I don't need that. Like I think our one disagreement was good enough, and I think that's where I'll leave it. I don't need his attention. Especially when, again, it doesn't really matter what he says. Um, so today I did want to do a co-working stream, but I also did want to talk about like, kind of like, I noticed that the other day, people were kind of like asking questions about like Spanish colonization and different countries in the Americas and all of that stuff. And so I also thought it would be interesting to kind of talk. I mean, I know I put Mexican history, but in reality, I would be fine like answering stuff from the colonial period in Spain, of Spain, and also sort of talking about how, like, even in my research, even in fact, even in one of the main books I'm using for my research right now, which thankfully was bought for me by, through Throne, that actually, even she, Maria Elena Martinez, writes that it's so that there are actually people in Spain that essentially want to act like the Inquisition was just like a, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal, we shouldn't worry about it, let's not talk about it, let's not talk about, limpieza de sangre or purity of blood, let's not talk about the expulsions of, Jews and then Muslims and all of that stuff, because it makes, they think it's going to make Spain look bad. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that the colonization of the Americas alone makes it look bad. I don't think you need anything else. Like, how can you be proud of the colonizer part, but not the, like, other parts that were part of the whole thing? Like, I don't know. It just seems to me quite, like, a very strange thing. And I did also want to talk about, like, Judaism and Islam during these time periods, but also because again, obviously, this is before a lot of things became standardized. Like, that's one thing I often feel people, like, when they think about, let's not talk about the genocides we did in our own territories, instead, yeah, exactly, pretty much. And, that's one of the things that, like, there are a lot of scholars, even in Latin America, that try to act like, oh, we shouldn't really talk about it, it's not that important. And so there's this huge gap in research that, like, Maria Elena Martinez and I work in, but then when it comes to, like, finding, like, I use her book, because her book is kind of like the standard bearer when it comes to these things, but it focuses on colonial Mexico because it was the most populated colony, and also had the most immigration to it during the colonial period, or during the initial colonial period. And what's really interesting is like the fact that they did essentially race tests for people that wanted to move to the New World. Like, they wouldn't just let anybody move to the New World. Like, if you were poor, that was fine. They just wanted to make sure that you were an old Christian. Like, you couldn't be a Morisco or a Converso. You had to be a pure-blooded Spaniard. Yeah, oh, and that's exactly one thing that also Maria Elena Martinez goes into this book too, which is also my thing. Like, I don't know if you've ever read the book, Why Nations Fail, but, like, the first chapter or the introduction to that book is literally like, what is the difference between, like, why is it that, so they look at, like, these two border towns here in the, like, one is a U.S. border town, right, and then the other side of the border wall, they look at the Mexican one, and they say, what is the difference between these two? And they literally go into, like, well, America got lucky because it got colonized by the British, who were all about, yeoman farmers and independence and all that shit, and Mexicans, they were like, like, literally just rehashing the black legend about Spain, but trying to, like, to do that with the white legend of the English, right? Like, that's literally something that, again, is propagated by, the two major enemies of the Spanish at this time, and is still used, particularly in the Anglosphere, to this day, right? Where there's that Hispanophobia that occurred in the 16th and 17th centuries still exists in some form to this day, right? Where, it's, well, we didn't colonize it as badly as, the Spaniards did, or all of this stuff. But then you also have people like Vasconcelos, who then, yeah, it's not subtle at all. Like that, like, that's why, like, I've seen pictures of people like giving the book away or showing the book in imperialized countries, like former colonies in Africa, and I'm just like, that is not a good book to read, because then you're gonna say, like, oh, well, if we would have been colonized by the British, then we would be better off than if we would have been colonized by the French, when it's like, I mean, that's not the point, right? Like, it's not, you don't want to be colonized by anybody, right? Like, it's not like, oh, the English cared about what they were doing. It's like they all had different policies when it came to being settler colonies, but I mean, all of the Americas are settler colonies. Um, and so, the uh, only thing you can, yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much exactly what they were saying. I mean, and it kind of goes, it's interesting because that's the liberal version of the narrative that right wingers right now are trying to push in order to invade Mexico, which I'm just like, can you imagine just like, just how bad it would be, um, just how bad it would be to actually um, have like any amount of U.S. soldiers anywhere near the you know Mexico in general. Yeah, they are. Lindsey Graham said they need to invade. Dan Crenshaw says they need to invade. They're like, and the Mexican president's been like responding, but the U.S. news doesn't really cover it because I guess it doesn't really go well with what they're trying to sell. But like the Mexican president said, like, Mexico is more democratic than the United States, because over there you just have oligarchy. Again, I'm not saying like I agree with him that it's like, oh, it's about being more democratic as such, right? Because it's obviously, but yeah, like they're actually talking about like essentially kind of like like they're almost using the same wording as Russia, where it's like it would be a special military operation because we wouldn't be sending in like, oh, like it's not like we would be trying to conquer territory, which is a lie. Like that is an absolute lie. Like America has been, you know, pissing itself to try to take over Mexico for like since the 1800s. So that's just a lie. Um, and so another thing too is that then that would also possibly, I mean you can already tell what they're going to try to say, like, hi FLFNF, it's so good to see you, thank you for making it to the stream today. um, like another thing too is that they've already picked out where they want to, I mean pretty much, yeah, because one of the things that they want to control is water resources in Mexico, because there are a lot of things like right along the border. Let me see. Give me a second. Uh, like there are a lot of things like in the U.S. Mexico border that are um, that I can look at really quickly. I just realized that this one doesn't have a really good transition screen, but oh well. Yeah, so the Colorado River, the one thing that the Colorado River does, or I guess has or does not have, is that it here, let me transition to this. So one of the things that the Colorado River has that is kind of like, is kind of important to consider is the fact that the Colorado River it's supposed to give some of its water to Mexico. Like the lower basin has two Mexican states that are included in that. The one I'm from, right, like Baja California Norte and Sonora, and both of them are very dry states. But also they're states where they grow a lot of food, right? Like in Mexicali and the area just north of Mexicali, which is in the United States, which is called Calexico, um, and like that whole Imperial Valley area, that's where they grow like stuff in fact if you go to the Yuma side, that's where they grow 95% of all U.S. lettuce during winter. Um, so and so one of the things that is kind of a big issue. I'm trying to see if I can find a good map that also shows the hydrology a little bit, because I think that's what's kind of missing here, is like when people look at maps of Mexico and the United States, like it just shows a line, but it doesn't show you like, well, what else is there, right? I think this is what it's trying to show. Oh gosh, this map is so bad. Like, I'm trying to find one that's like, looks good, but yeah, so essentially, there is water that is supposed to be allotted to Mexico because it's there, right? Like, it's that's what it borders, and they're supposed to get, but essentially all trillion gallons that that all trillion gallons. Well, I guess here we can look at this really quickly. So you guys can see here, right? Like on this here, like this is the coastal corridor. So these are wildlife corridors that are open for animals to walk back and forth between the two countries. But then everywhere else besides that, they want to have the walls, right? And so this is another one where you can see Brownsville is kind of where essentially where the border starts, and you can see the walls or pedestrian fences. And then here in like most of the Southwest, you see this. And remember, like, this wasn't the case until 1995. Like, 1995 is when they actually brought the wall into existence. And so one thing to keep in mind too is that Tijuana, right, like where I'm from right here, this little corner of Mexico. It has a very similar weather to California in that it's like very Mediterranean, right? It doesn't really rain a lot. It doesn't really, but here in all of these areas, even the protected areas, there are lots of reservoirs that exist here in these spaces. And the United States has been trying to get more and more water to be allotted to it, right? And that's one of the major things. Oh yeah, I was just transitioning to it in a second. Sorry, I'm starting to use OBS and I keep forgetting to press the transition button. But but thank you, I appreciate that. Like, I noticed it at the last second. I was like, oh yeah, I'm not even showing. So again, like, you have this too, where you have the pedestrian fences and the Cabeza Prieta area, the Oregon Pipe Cactus National Park, El Pinacate y Gran Desierto de Altar. But as you can see right here, can we see the picture of the kitty again? Which kitty? Oh, this one? Yeah, that's the ocelot. Ocelote. But yeah. So this is actually one of the most endangered species, because, again, like, 134 mammal, 178 reptile, and 57 amphibian species live within 30 miles of just the imaginary line that they said is the border. Like, what people don't understand is that the border is just a property thing. It's just a property issue. Like, that's what it exists for, right? Like, that's where the limit of private property can be within one bourgeois state. And that's one of the things that I guess I often don't never quite understood why people take it to be like so. But yeah. But see, look, new walls along the lower Rio Grande Valley could further isolate the few remaining populations of ocelots in the United States. Because remember, yeah, the only use for borders is deciding who gets that's taxes. Yeah, exactly, and to whom, exactly. And so, like, the ocelots in particular, it's like, if they are not given these these access to for one, Sky Islands, which personally, like, that's one of my areas of interest when it comes to, like, environmental sciences and biology, etc., is looking at the preservation of biodiversity that exists in Sky Islands, because they exist on both sides of the border, but the border wall cuts through that. So, that's not good. But it is sad that yeah, see, from Arizona, New Mexico, into Mexico. So, like, I've only been to a couple. I've been to ones in New Mexico, and I've been to some in Mexico too. Um, but this is essentially what is meant right here. Like, these areas right here, these sky islands, are essentially they're mountains that, because they're so high up, they actually get enough rain and other things, right? Like they have a desert floor, but because they're so high up, they actually have vegetation and everything, and so they tend to have either nomadic populations that go from sky island to sky island, or they tend to have endemic populations that are you know very difficult to just not pay attention to, right? And so that's the problem that people see. Like right now, along this border right here, this straight line, they were putting, and I know this because I know someone who's protesting somewhere, like in this area, is that they are putting, what's it called? Like the back of like 18-wheelers, right? Like of the big trucks. They're putting those connexes and they're stacking them up. Like instead of building the wall, they're putting these like connexes that degrade terribly, just on the ground here, just so that way there's a wall, like something. And then here's Mexican gray wolves, the most endangered wolf in the world. In 2016, there were just 113 in the U.S. and about 3 dozen south of the border. So again, what this leads to is cutting off animal populations that reduce gene flow and causes inbreeding, leading to a greater risk of extinction. Right? And so the wall, like there's no reason to have the wall, right? Like obviously for legal reasons, even like as we actually heard from Elise when she came to speak with us, right? Even the people that do, right, even under immigration law in the U.S., there really is no such thing as an illegal immigrant as such, right? Like that's a rhetorical thing, right? It's not something that's actually like a real, right? But with the gray wolves, like they're so close to extinction, right? Like literally there are under 300 of them where there used to be thousands, right? And they're important for the entire ecosystem that exists there, that entire biome, and even particular microbiomes, right? And so in this paper that we're looking at here with Lasky, the biggest risk comes with the fences bisect the range of small populations of a species with a specialized habitat, leaving the majority of the population on one side and others adrift. And there are 45 species and 3 subspecies that the current fence is affecting in this way. Yes, exactly. And that's one of the things that this is why another big thing is where they do have those animal crossings, right? I guess animal crossings. That's where you see a lot of ranchers trying to make inroads where they will try to fight against fight against there being no wall, right? 1, and 2, that's where they will also be well, if those animals show up on my land, vaguely defined, right? Because I remember once, if you go drive down in that area, which it's scary, being Mexican, it's scary to drive next to the Mexican border because of all the horrible white people that live there, right? Like they're just waiting for you to do something wrong. That way they have an excuse to, attack you. And I wish that I were joking. That's not even, anyway. If you go out into the countryside, there are so many of them, so many hogs. And so they will assert their property rights and try to say so what I saw when I went down there, I know, yeah, so when I went down to I think it was in New Mexico because it was by Ciudad Juarez, that they will walk around with with like a gun, and they're like technically outside of their property, but because it's nearby the property, they're like, oh well, like I don't know what they would argue in court, but I mean, if the court's going to be held in the hog town with the hog people, right? They're not going to see, if they see this, Mexican trans ambi, like uh, going there, and then they see this like middle-aged white man with the gun, right? Like they're gonna believe him, not me, right? Like that's sadly how it works. And one of the things that I saw is like they said, oh well, we're hunting, and that area is specifically like for so many miles, like you're not supposed to hunt in that area, but they will claim, well, it's my right to hunt, right? Like my Second Amendment right, which it, whatever. But like they will use that kind of logic, like, well, I have the right to hunt, and they will shoot like the gray wolves. And these gray wolves, like, they're necessary for, again, one, the genetic diversity of the area, but also they're important because a lot of the things that people dislike, for example, like a lot of the um, as we know, because all the different food chains, the food webs that exist, all depend on having, apex predators, etc. But again, right, so these are the wildlife affected by the border wall most. And this is in the wildlife refuge, so this is on the Texas side, right? So you have the mountain lion, so you have a lot of cats, which is wonderful. Jaguarundi, which a lot of people haven't heard of because they see the word jaguar or whatever, jaguar, and they think of, but it's jaguarundi. Ocelot, which is what we saw a little bit ago. Bobcats, which are just fuzzy kittens. And then mountain lions. So this is the one that I actually... Yes, yeah. In fact, I actually remember that when they wanted to take away certain, like they wanted to introduce what is it called whenever they like fill lakes? Oh, they wanted to stock a lake with essentially an invasive species, and they lost, like they didn't get to do that, and it was by Glacier National Park, and literally, like, just by leaving it alone, just by allowing for all, instead of focusing on the fishermen, instead focusing on the animals and the wildlife, like, the water is so clear, you can see through it. Like, for me, like, in LA, there aren't many water places, like, rivers, streams, etc., where you can see through the water, right? Like, the LA River... it's channeled in this horrible, concrete thing. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's like kind of, and again, look, like there is no reason why that, people, like, so this is Big Bend Parks, and it's funny, I actually got a sticker about this the other day, but like this part has no fence, right? Because there can't, right? Because there's a river. But then you have all of these patrols here that just make it just dangerous because, again, there's no reason that like this is connected to this, right? Ecologically, biologically, etc. Like the people that want to see this as this like reified division is like, no, the river is what allows for both sides to, right? And so here is this is a jaguar. He's known as El Jefe, the chief, or the boss. And wow, his coloration is so striking. I love that. That is so nice. So you can see here, like, the jaguar habitats. They have a northern preserve of 80 to 120 individuals, but they don't even show it on this map. Like, they don't even show that, like, right here is the state of Sonora. Like, I know that across from Arizona is Sonora, so, I don't know. It's just weird that they don't even show the Mexican stuff. But, like, this recently was reintroduced in on the Mexican side. And, like, right away, like, everything that, they had thought about, doing, was completely, yeah, like here's what I was talking about. Like Nogales is the main entry point between this Arizona and Sonora. So right here on the left hand side, you can't really see it, but there's like a white line which is the border, but right here is the delta of the Colorado River. And these two states, I said Sonora, which is this panhandle going this way, and Baja California Norte, where I'm from, this on this side, we're supposed to get our allocation of water too. But what ends up happening is the United States will use all 1 trillion gallons or whatever cubic feet or whatever of water before it reaches Mexico. So a lot of the water that does reach Mexico is literally like essentially industrial slush. And one of the most polluted rivers, maybe I should pull that up. Um, let's see here. Let's see. New River, California. Let's see. Because it's like really bad. Oh, yeah, they're talking about the atmospheric river, but yeah, that's not the river I'm looking for. It's called the New River, but maybe if I just look up pollution, because it's like really, really bad. Oh yeah, here we go.
It's recognized as one of the most polluted rivers, if not the most polluted river in the United States. It's full of the sewage and domestic sewage, as well as undertreated sewage, and the chemical effluent from a number of manufacturing plants from a city of almost 2.5 million people.
I mean, think about that. Remember, this river is right on the border, right? Like, this is right on the border. This is like they love to try to blame. Yeah, and you wouldn't have as much character without it. Exactly, like it's gonna put hair on your chest, as Americans like to say. Um, like it's weird. Like there was this discussion about gender yesterday, and like people were trying to be like gender essentialist on NCC stream, right? Like Bosch and all of that. And I just thought like there are so many things that I'm thinking that like yeah, of course, every culture has its, that has, um, patriarchy and white supremacy, etc., right? Like that's the thing. But like I was trying to think of like growing up, the stuff that I heard most was always from Americans about like masculinity. Like in Mexico and with Mexicans, I've never really heard that much. Like or if I did, it was the same thing. But anyway, back to the river. Um, when this river has actually had it so bad that had so many chemicals in it that it actually was bubbling over. Like there was no water essentially. Like it was so thick with chemicals that it was just bubbles, right? These like toxic bubbles, and that's essentially what happened. And so again, it's like it's really easy to blame, oh well, it's because of, again, yeah, this is the issue. Also, when you have a city like Mexicali that's in the middle of the desert, which by the way, it's the capital of Baja California Norte, and also it has a huge agricultural industry that mirrors the one on the other side of the border, and you know what I mean? Like it's just bad all around. Like there are so many things that would have to be done. One of those things is that, yeah, Mexico does not have the same capacity of water reclamation, etc., that the United States has. But that's also, right, a problem because of imperialism, right? Like that becomes very clear that, like, in order for San Diego to be this pristine city, right, they have to imperialize the areas that are in the third world, right, in which is Mexico, because that's what you always see. Like I've already mentioned before, like when I lived there, there was a case that happened where they actually caught companies going into Mexico to dump their trash, and then they want to blame that on Mexicans, and it's like they didn't choose that, right? Like they didn't say, oh, we want them to come dump their trash here. They would do that illegally, and let alone the maquiladoras, which are like these sweatshops that operate right by the border and are seen as, I mean, they're seen as good paying jobs because they pay you more than the minimum wage, which is $11 US a day. That's the minimum wage in Mexico. When I told my friend that, who is a Chicanx and, kind of has never really been to Mexico, really, like they kind of didn't realize how little people got. Like, like they knew it was a little bit, but they didn't realize how little it was, right? And so if you divide 11 by 8, right, then you can find out of just about how they make per hour, I suppose. But yeah, like, and this is, by the way, $11 US a day is a 20% increase on what it was last year. So again, like the minimum wage is very low, and the disparities between very wealthy people and the very poor is just very apparent. Like the working classes, I would say, have more class consciousness than, to some degree. I'm not saying that they're perfect, obviously, but they definitely do have more class consciousness than, say, the American working classes, in the sense that the huge disparity between the most wealthy and everybody else is so pronounced in Mexico that it's, the inequality just says everything. So this is called the Sonoran Institute, and I like their stuff because they actually work on trying to get, to make sure that Mexico gets its allotment of water. Because again, like, the Colorado River is huge. Yeah, when the disparities that start, exactly. It's the reason why, like, I noticed that when there was so the last time I was in Mexico City, they were gonna have huge protests, and they already had set up all of the stuff, and I've never seen that in the United States, where it's like they literally have to put up like steel barriers and everything, because it gets similar to like how it is in Paris, because like there are some things that again, the current government has done to alleviate certain things, but then there are other aspects that haven't gone away. Like, for one thing one thing I will mention is that, like, in Mexico, there technically is universal health care, and it's technically split between two agencies. The IMSS, which is there if you have a job. So if you're a worker, you can go to their hospitals, their clinics, and be seen. And then they have the ISSSTE, which is pretty much for everybody else. But again, there is not enough money invested into that because of the previous many governments that exist, that have all worked to cut the very small budget that it already had. And so what the current president has been trying to do is to get all of the state clinics to be brought in and become part of the Secretaria General de la Salud, and of health, the Secretariat of Health, and by doing that, then they're able to expand their reach. However, the availability of medicine and the right and all of this stuff is also part of another issue, which is that private, right, particularly people who, doctors who are very young, who work for very low wages at a pharmacy, right? So the pharmacy will rent out a space next to it, and then they will have, and they will get you like a desk and maybe something to see the patients on, but that's it. And they will try to push. So these are the private pharmacies, the private hospitals, right? Like they get a lot of more people to go to them because one, the pharmacies can offer you very, very cheap prices, but like for example, like going to the doctor at a pharmacy, they cost 50 pesos. That's like $1, maybe $2 and 25 cents, something about that. Whereas in America, it costs a lot more, obviously. But the reason why they're able to offer it to you so low is because they're not paying a doctor, a medical doctor, like a salary, right? Everything is based on how many patients they see during a day. So they're incentivized, one, to see tons of patients, and two, right, and in that sense, to get them out as quickly as possible. But they also are incentivized by the relationship between the private pharmacies and the rented space, right, the rented clinic that they own. Oh my gosh! Thank you so much, Lexi. Thank you so much, Ink Sexy Lexi. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Welcome so much to the stream. It's so good to see you all. Yay, it's so good to see all of you. Yay. Welcome, Raiders. I'm Shakespeare. Oh, give me one quick second. Okay. Thank you guys so much, Nabil. JJ, thank you guys so much for the gifted subs. It's so good to see you, Cryptid Mage. It's so good to see you. Yeah, see you later, Lexi. I'm so glad that I was able to see your stream too. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for the resubscription, Zara. So good to see you. I read your name and Scary Movie pops into my head. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. Hi, I am Shakespeare, and so right now, they them pronouns, and right now we're talking about the Colorado River, and also talking about Mexico, how it's not given its allotment of. Oh, thank you so much, Lexi. So bye. And yeah. Oh yeah, of course. It was my pleasure. I tried to see if I could also wrangle people in, like try to get, I mean, not wrangle, but you know what I mean, like try to get people to come in and watch. Um, but yes, so right now we're talking about this because it's something that's really important for, yes, everyone, please make sure to give Ink Sexy Lexi a follow. Literally was like making my whole morning earlier because it was just so funny. Like just I love your like commentary whilst gaming. It's just amazing. Um, and so right now that's what we're talking about. But I'm also did want to do a co-working stream because hi Fina. Oh, it's so good to see you. How are you doing? And it's so good to see you, Fondiva the Rebel. Oh my gosh. I hope it wasn't an important class, JJ. I hope that everything's gonna be okay. Um, like, I don't know. Oh yes, I'm doing well, thank you. So right now, like I said, we're talking about the Colorado River because a lot of people don't know. Like I know Levelhead goes into this much more when it talks about the Upper Basin. So I live in California, and that's a lower basin state, right? But I also lived in Baja California because that's my hometown. Tijuana, I should say. Tijuana is my hometown. Yes, yes. My Discord should be right here. There we go. Please, be free. Feel free to join. Um, and so, ooh, Orange County. Okay, yeah. Irvine is nice. I mean, like you know what I mean. Like I usually go through Orange County. Like because I'm always going between L.A. and Tijuana. Like those are my like two places, like my two poles of existence sometimes. But yeah, like I know a lot of people that go that are PhD students or are. It said link expired. Okay, let me see if I can get a new one really quick. Invite people. It should have been permanent, but it's okay if we have to. Okay, here. Let's see. Never. Okay. I hope that I hope that oh great, now where is chat? uh there we go. There, that should work. Um but oh yeah, Riverside. Yeah, that's where my oh well, I guess I don't want to I'm not going to go into detail, but like Riverside, yeah, I have family that lives in Riverside. It's the realest, that's for sure. San Clemente? Oh, okay. Oh, that's good to know, Fina. It's good to know. Um, having a healthy colon health is really important. Um, so that's always important. So what I was talking about is that all trillion gallons or whatever, essentially all of the water, these issues matter. And honestly, when you speak Spanish, it makes me so happy. It makes me feel like at home. Oh, that's so sweet, Jilly. That means a lot. Yeah, no, oh my gosh, we had a hype train. Yes. Yes. Hype train level 2. Um, 6 subs. Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you everybody. I really appreciate it. We're getting somewhere. Yay. Um, so I can see where I used to live because I have no connection to those places now. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah. Um, yes, yes, Nabil, we are besties. Um, and so like one of the things that happens with the United States is that they essentially use up all the water. Oh my gosh, October. Thank you so much for your resubscription. Wow, 4 months already. And so one of the things that happens is that the water that should be given to Mexico, because it does have the Colorado River running through it, particularly the Delta, is that the United States will use all of the water before it gets to Mexico, and then it will give Mexico essentially industrial slush. And we were just watching a video about the New River, which is one of those rivers that is on the border, super polluted. You don't want to be anywhere near it. Just has raw sewage. It has underprocessed water, and it has industrial chemicals all in it. And once I was talking about how the river was so bad, it had gotten so bad that not even joking, the water had essentially all become this immense horrible bubble, almost I want to compare it to a bubble bath, right? In the sense all of these bubbles, but they were all toxic, right? It was like a toxic bubble bath, right? Now what if the Canadians did that to these, right? I know, if the Canadians were oh, you know what, we don't want to give you water, or were to do the same thing, allow poison, and it's always the U.S. The U.S. loves giving poisonous water to everybody else. Hi Judas, it's so good to see you. I'm so happy to see you that you can make it to the stream today. And so one of the things that this is talking about is how the Sonoran Institute, I should say, is an organization. No delay on stream. Again, like I said, one of the things that is really important for me is the actual Colorado River, particularly the Delta, because when they let 1%, I'm not even joking, 1% of the water flow that was allotted to Mexico, just 1%, almost an immense amount of wildlife was finally able to return to the Colorado River Delta for the first time in years. I'm not even that was an amazing thing to see. And so I've always followed the Sonoran Institute because they focus. Orange County is called the Grand Sonora Desert in GTA. Oh, I didn't know that. I actually haven't played GTA really. At least not, I used to watch my cousins play it, but one day Canada will cut off the supply of maple syrup and the US will crumble as their pancake meals are less palatable. Oh my gosh. So, it's interesting because I know, my grandfather, when he first kind of got introduced to, American breakfasts, he just got the maple syrup and just poured it all over everything, the eggs, the bacon, and just everything, right? That's true. Most Americans don't even use real maple syrup, right? They use, because, again, it's in Mexico, we don't really use... we don't eat that, right? Is the day we go up there and take it by force? Yeah, seriously, Furious Gems. Yes. Yes, Gems. That will be the day. That will be the day that Canada finally becomes part of. Yeah, so that's what I was also mentioning earlier, is that they are talking about invading Mexico, and one of those important reasons why is because, oh my gosh, thank you so much for following Fina Colada. So one of those things that happened is that, yes, top Republicans are saying this, and also they are trying to, at the same time, the United States, this is something that is not mentioned. Yeah, colonization, because right by the border in Sonora, actually, the state of Sonora, which kind of is kitty corner from California and New Mexico, and it's kind of right underneath Arizona, they discovered a whole bunch of lithium, right? They discovered a whole bunch of lithium, and because of that, they've been having a lot of problems via so you know how they redid the whole NAFTA thing? They did TMEC. I honestly don't know what the English things are. in Mexico, it's TMEC, Tratado Mexico, Estados Unidos, Canada. So one of the major things is like, they were trying to argue, or they were trying to take to court the Mexican government essentially by saying that, or to their arbitration vehicle that they have for the treaty, that they wanted to say that Mexico's constitution and the government is being too protective of their natural resources, right? And that's one of those things that it's like, okay, it's in the Constitution. I mean, I actually have the Constitution like on hand, like it's just over there, because it's in the Constitution that all minerals, water, etc., all belongs to, it's the patrimony of the Mexican people, right? And so when NAFTA happened, and now this time they want essentially Mexico to undo that part of its constitution and say, well, actually, anybody can buy into that, right? And so that's been a big problem. That's why the United States has also been trying to like say that like AMLO is a really horrible president, etc., because one of the things that AMLO wanted to do was the reforma energética, that is to say, the reform of the Federal Electric Agency, right, or Commission. It's the CFE, and when they did that, they essentially said, we're not going to create private, like we're not going to privatize the electric industry, because that doesn't make any sense. Like we already have a whole nationwide system. Why would we like break it apart and give it to smaller, like give it to companies to be the distributors, right? And one thing I mentioned on, no good will come from privatizing energy. And in fact, one of the things that's actually a good thing, because it is nationalized, is that when you first move into a house, right? Like when you first move into a house, and you do it through the national, like hipotecaria, like and you're mortgaging it using the national mortgaging agency, I guess is one way to think of it. They don't charge you for your water or for your electric bill for the for the full year. So 365 days after you have moved in, because they want you to like, they don't want you to be worrying about like small expenses when obviously you just put down all this money on this house, and it doesn't make any sense to try to get you. In the U.S., the issue isn't even that it's it's that it's literally a forced monopoly. Exactly, exactly. YB. Australia did it a decade ago, and it's cripplingly expensive. Yeah, I mean, so I know that in some places in the country, like there's only one provider. Like it's still a private one though, so they can charge pretty much whatever they want. Like it's just a monopoly. But people don't, and then I don't know, like it's just, so yeah, like that's what happened. Like when my parents got the house that we lived in, when I was like, I guess like in middle school, I guess like 6th grade, I guess. That's when we got that's when they had the thing where if you get a house through the National Mortgaging Agency, then you're able to get that year off. And it's pretty generalized, but especially if you do purchase a home, that's when they're most likely to give you that. Again, you just have to sign up for it. It's like anybody could sign up for it if you buy a home. And also, there's no such thing as an empirical truth. It is a theory that has no foundation in reality, even though all of our econ textbooks will say the energy. Yeah, exactly. That's true. I mean, that's very true. And I think even Lenin sort of talks about that a little bit in Imperialism, the High Stage of Capitalism, because Kautsky kind of sees, right, he kind of takes that line of like, specific types of monopolies, etc.
He aprendido a apreciar al río como un ente vivo. Al estar dentro de sus aguas se siente la fuerza de sus flujos. Si el río nos diera un mensaje, quizá algunos pensarían que el mensaje es la nostalgia. Pero yo pienso diferente. Yo creo que el río nos está dando un mensaje de esperanza.
Estamos en la parte baja del Alto Estuario, es parte del delta del río Colorado. Está dentro de la reserva de la biosfera del Alto Golfo de California.
Historically, the estuary was a huge area. It was a vast plain of tidal influence and freshwater floods that changed every year.
Tiene un sinnúmero, una diversidad de hábitats como marismas, los canales de marea, terrazas inundables, planicies lodosas, praderas de pasto salado y un poco más al norte el canal principal del río.
Recreating an estuary, even a small estuary at the mouth of the river, would bring back birds, it would bring back marine life, it would bring back fish, and it would help the people.
Exactly. And so, like, this is so much the case that, again, the fact that the United States always tries to not allow or make it so that by the time that the water, whatever water reaches Mexico, it's already been used up. Like, it's literally like, here's used up water. And so that's why most of it, if it is used almost immediately just to water cash crops that then are sold either to, you know, the two states, right? So the markets of the two states within the internal Mexican market, or they're sold to the United States, right? So this is where a lot of your, like, avocados from Mexico, right? Yeah, all of that stuff, like, again, this is, right, they had competition and regulators came in and forced one company to close. In every case, this is what happened in reality. There are no cases where one company had total control before it was given to them by the government. Yeah, pretty much. That Elysium movie scares me more and more every time I watch it. Oh, yeah, yeah. I just learned about this recently. One of my professors taught me this, and he is not a leftist at all. He's a conservative. It's just the truth. Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, that's the reason why it's, like, it's very interesting to me when people think that, like, economics in particular, right? Like, and even political economy, I guess one could say, somehow it can be divorced from, you know, things like Marxist analysis, or that's, it's like, so much of what modern economics depends on is the fact that Marx very aptly was able to make, you know, this survey of the second industrial revolution in capitalism. We have to do this. Yeah, no, we do. And that's one of the things. It's like the amount of wildlife when they allowed 1%, just 1% of the allotment that is supposed to be given. Because remember, I mean, Tijuana has like 2 million people, right? It's like bigger, you know, right? Explain what is wrong with, no, exactly. I mean, what isn't wrong with capitalism? I had a dream that I moved in with a family that had no idea I'm trans, and it was fucking beautiful. I want to have that dream every night. Oh, that's interesting. You know, like, for me, one thing I will say is that, one thing I always hate is, like, when people are like, how can you be trans and an MB? It's like, because you can. Like, I just, sorry, that's just what came to mind when because I was like, I wish I could live in a world where, like, people wouldn't try to, like, you know, how can you be two things at once? Like, I mean, because I am.
The flow to the ocean has been disrupted ever since the dams were constructed on the river.
Bueno, el tema del medio ambiente en el río Colorado es un tema que ha sido causa de muchas, vamos a decirlo, alianzas entre grupos ambientalistas, el sector académico, las dependencias del medio ambiente, las dependencias del agua.
Actualmente, las fuentes de agua que llegan al Alto Estuario son dos, principalmente agua de la planta Las Arenitas, que trata aproximadamente más del 50% del agua residual de la ciudad de Mexicali. El otro componente es agua de retorno agrícola.
El agua que tenemos en Arenitas sigue todo este recorrido, río Hardy, río Colorado, Alto Estuario, hasta desembocar cuando las condiciones lo permiten en el Golfo de California.
So again, it's not something that happens. Thank you. Are you saying thank you to me, Von Diva? That's an argument. I'm confused how people are really arguing these things. Yeah, I mean, like, essentially what they try to say is, like, okay, like, because you're non-binary, therefore you can't be trans. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like, the whole, it just shows how people do not understand what being trans or what being non-binary means, right? Like, what they think non-binary means is, like, it's like how some people will compare being non-binary always to the idea of, like, oh, there are some cultures that have third genders. It's like, yes, but that's a third gender. That's not, and yeah, and they don't listen, Like, I know, I come from a country where, like, in Mexico, where we have a long tradition of third genders, right? Yes, being envious trans as fuck. Yes, exactly. And so, like, for me, I'm just like, I know in Oaxaca we have muxes, and and they're seen as a blessing in their families, right? Like, it's seen as a blessing to have a musha, but that's a third gender. That's not the same thing as non-binary. That's not the same thing as being trans. In fact, if I had access to the show, right, I would play it. But the problem is, oh no, you lost your voice again? Oh no. Like, if you were to actually, if we could actually watch that episode, seems every time I stream too much, it goes, yeah, no, I totally get what you mean. Like, I just wanted to stream today because, like, I also wanted to stream early today because I have to go take another puppy to go get, for her, I just need to get her nails trimmed because I can't use the normal ones because hers curl in, so, I have to make sure that they're taken care of really well to make sure that nothing, because it hurts. I mean, especially because the quick, for dogs is much more out than it is with human beings, right? Like, the quick is that little white part that you see. I mean, really, the quick is everything underneath the nail, but and that's because the word quick means alive. Like when people say quickly, right? Like, look alive quickly, like to be, like, something for, like, the quick in this case means the live part of the nail. Like, that's what quick means, that something is alive. That's why, and you can read old poems and books, and they'll say, like, the dead and the quick. Like, they don't mean people that are fast, they mean quick as in alive. So yeah.
Después del temblor del 2010, perdimos gran parte de la conectividad entre el río y el mar.
Por ejemplo, las lagunas que había, donde aquí se iban a pescar lisa, se iban a pescar mojarritas, el bocón, que era de agua dulce.
Estamos en una zona desértica.
It's funny how the word for largemouth bass is literally like bocón, because, like, that can be used as an insult, I guess. Like, oh, eres muy bocón. Like, that means, like, you're like that you like you never shut up or whatever, like that kind of thing. Like, you're always, one of those people. But it's interesting when it's used, like, literally, right? Like, big mouth.
Finalmente, entonces, las condiciones son algo extremas, principalmente en verano. Temperaturas muy altas, una alta evaporación.
Also, this is one of the reasons the very high evaporation rate is actually why the Sonora Desert, as opposed to the Mojave Desert and other deserts in the area, is actually the Chiricahua Desert or the Chihuahua Desert, is actually the wettest desert on the planet. Because it does get a lot of water, but most of it evaporates. So more evaporates than falls down. So it gets a lot of water, but it loses a whole bunch of water. And that's what defines a desert, that it loses more water than it takes in. So that's the reason why, like, when we're talking about water management, in this case, in Sonora, right, and on Baja California, like, we have to take those things into account, is that the evaporation rate always takes out more than is put in. So all of the efforts of conservation, yeah, I hope it comes back to Nabil. Oh, also, Nabil, did you by any chance get get to see that documentary. I'm just wondering because I watched all 3 episodes, and they're really interesting. But I think that episode 1 is probably the one that, like the third one is the one that talks about like more like contemporary stuff. But like episode 1 is like, wow, just goes really deep into the whole idea, like the RSS and all of that. But I do hope that you feel better, that your voice can come back.
La zona empieza a tener salinidad cada vez más alta. Como no llega agua dulce, entra el agua de marea y la marea se queda en el sitio y con la evaporación empieza a aumentar la salinidad cada vez más.
Para reconectar el río con el mar, además de más agua, se requería remover sedimentos que habían asolvado el canal principal del río.
Wow, could you imagine like being part of the group of people that are like right here walking on this? Like, that would be so cool. I don't know, just like this causeway, right? Like it makes me think of, not exactly, I know it's not exactly because, but it makes me think of, you know, Tenochtitlan, like what Mexico City used to be like under the Mexica or Aztecs, right? Where like, in order to get into the city, you would have to cross something like this just to get there.
En 2016 se hizo el principal desasolve del canal principal del río, en alrededor de 9.8 kilómetros, para conectar la zona del río con el alto estuario. Y eso ha permitido la entrada de agua de marea y la salida de agua dulce.
On flooding, droughts, water pollution, air pollution, and the effect of housing of people of color, I think this will be my main dissertation topic. After the semester, I will present this proposal in the summer. Oh my gosh! Ooh. When you do your colloquy, I don't know what they call it. Honestly, I don't know. Like, at George Washington, they call it colloquy. At Oxford, I don't know about. Well, I know about Oxford, but that's not the same thing. Like, is it if it's gonna be if you have to do it openly? Personally, I would. I mean, if you would want me to see it, I would love to see your dissertation proposal or colloquy. Or I don't know what they call it because like different schools call it different things, right? But did you already do your comps, JJ? I assume so, right? You already did your comps? Also, another thing too is like, one thing I always dislike though about the kind of the kind of liberal argument that people like to talk about. I mean, you know, if it gets water to the, you know, into the upper estuary and into the you know, into the delta itself, fine, whatever. Like, I really don't care. But I hate how liberals always have to try to word it in like, oh, if we were to put more water in the river, then there would be more jobs. Oh, okay, awesome. Yeah, I mean, if you want me to, JJ, I totally understand. If not, you know, but I would just be very interested to hear it, to be there and to be there to support you, like for all of you, all of my subscribers, followers. You know, I'm always here to support you in any way I can. So, you know, if you join the Discord or, you know, you have questions on this or that, you know, I'm always here, you know, to talk and everything. But going back to what I was just saying, the way how they try to word it is like, well, then there would be more jobs in Mexico, and then they wouldn't want to be coming to the United States. Yeah, more water equals more jobs. Yeah, I know. What a revelation. But they always try to do it in like, then we'll have less immigration. And I'm like, because obviously they're trying to appeal to conservatives, but it's just like such a weird way of putting it. Like, well, if we give them some water, right? Like, no, they by legal treaty, they have to get their water. But they want to be like, well, if we give them the water, then it can make us money, right? Like, everything is about like, how do we make money while also making ourselves seem philanthropic, right?
En 2011, los datos muestran que el río y el mar se conectaban por 18 días al año. Después de las...
Think about that. Like, before they did this, only 18 days of the year. Sí, mentalidad de tiburón, exactamente. Y de buitre, eso es la cosa que yo odio cuando vienen estas cosas porque inmediatamente puedes ver que todo es, en ese sentido aglomerado, ¿verdad? Cuando viene a todo eso, pues tenemos que invertir, pero tenemos que agarrar algo de nuestra inversión, right? It's always like, okay, well then if you care about making money off of it, oh yeah, of course, yeah, I want my friends there so I can have some courage. Yeah, trust me, and it's like they're constantly asking behind, just be kind, like just let just be kind. And also, because like liberals love, and even conservatives, those talking about following the law. Like the treaty says you have to give this much water, that you have to give Mexico water, right? Like you have to give it to us, right? Just give it to, like if you're all about rule of law and all that stuff, oh no, I need all this water to put up in the back of my Ford F-150 pickup truck. It's like come on, like. And so what they were saying is like before they did their dredging work, where they completely were able to, undo a lot of the silt that was done. But remember, a lot of this also happened too because a lot of dust and dirt was swooped in during. So there's a phenomenon that exists in the Sonoran Desert in particular called, and they actually use the word from the Arabic, habub, right? And it's a huge dust storm. I mean, like, I actually remember once I went to a conference. And this was Ford F-250, yeah, for sure. And I went to a conference in Arizona, and which I went to because it was really close by. I'm like, okay, like the flight's gonna take 45 minutes max, right, from LA. And there was a haboob, right, and it like I remember I was just like standing outside and just like suddenly seeing this like huge, massive orange cloud just slowly envelop the entire like area around me, and I'm just like, oh gosh, like I need to go back into the conference, like where the sessions were having, and but in order to go get lunch, you had to walk outside, which I was like, why? It's really hot, and so yeah, I got caught up in like in a haboob, and so what happens when this is that this also affects the river as well, because if there's no water running through it, then it just packs in the dust, and once there is any moisture, it won't allow for the water to keep moving because it will just absorb it all, and then causes the dredging issue, right? And so after the restoration work, 171 days, so about a little bit over half of the year, no, not even, like this is less than half, right? Less than half of the year, now they're able to get that much time that there's water there.
De restauración hemos llegado a estimar 171 días.
Las acciones de restauración son de gran importancia, no solamente para la vida silvestre, sino para las comunidades que viven en los sitios donde trabajamos.
Pues la convivencia de que se va uno con los niños allá todo a trabajar, y los niños pues disfrutan el estar en el ambiente, allí el medio ambiente, la convivencia y todo.
El éxito en nuestras acciones lo medimos a través del monitoreo.
See, that's how we should measure success too, like when it comes to this stuff. By the amount and quality of scientific data gathering that we're able to do.
Monitoring. El ecológico y el socioambiental. En esa zona precisamente donde estamos no había pasto salado. Estaba todo descubierto y con alguna vegetación seca. Los últimos monitoreos estiman cerca de 9 hectáreas de pasto salado.
Y el pasto salado es muy importante también, o es un indicador de la salud, ¿verdad?, del alto estuario.
Este es un numeral de importancia y que pequeñas acciones pueden generar cambios muy importantes en un ecosistema como este.
This place at the estuary is critical to maintaining millions of birds passing through from South America to Alaska every year and back. It is a world-class treasure, and the cost of restoring it is small compared to its value.
But again, I don't like to look at things through like, oh well, you're gonna get more more of a return than what you put in. I get what the professor's trying to say. That's not what he's saying necessarily, but I am not a big fan of when everything becomes a question of the investment that we put in, we're gonna get so much back on it because 171 days of the year, and I would assume it's more now, but northern Mexico in particular is having a lot of water problems, whilst the United States, because of treaties that were signed, under neoliberal presidents, well, much more overtly neoliberal presidents, that's for sure, essentially make it so that Mexico would have to give up water that's well deep inside of its own territory, would have to open up these dams and let water flow go, so then that way Texas can get water from it, right? And can fill up reservoirs that are used for farming. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for the gifted sub, October to death to the opposition. Thank you so much. I'm so glad. And so that's one of the things that right now, we're sort of seeing this. You guys are so sweet. You're all so sweet. And so yeah, that's one of the major things that's happening in northern Mexico, is that there's a drought, and so much of the farmland that has been bought up by. So right now, Mexico's trying to not allow the importation of GMO corn from the United States. Now, they want to stop this because the last time, and I've mentioned this on stream many times, that the last time that Mexico opened up their internal market, when it came to corn, right? When it came to corn, that's what caused the collapse of the internal, farming market itself, and because essentially tons of places could no longer compete, right? And that allowed for the United States to get a huge, access to the Mexican market, and by doing so, caused all of these small farmers and small holdings to fold, and now they've been bought up by lots of larger corporations, etc. And, the idea of free trade and all of that stuff is, something that I'm trying to see if I can find the quote right here. Because I actually have Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, right here. And so it's something that I like to think about, right? It's something that's important to read, and I mean, it's so it's so prescient right now. So, I mean, one of the things that Lenin says, which I think is really important, is that what allowed for imperialism, at least in the modern sense, to happen, was the fact that imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, is that essentially, because other European countries and Japan, etc., they were able to have tariff barriers and able to protect themselves against England in particular, which is the first country to really become a capitalist country. That's why they were able to industrialize and able to become, right, other powers, right, capitalist powers. Same thing with the United States, etc. Whereas now the general, in fact, again, Lenin talks about this in imperialism, this whole, we need to have free and open trade, that only benefits the imperialist countries, right? It's, and so that's the reason why I think that when we're thinking of this, it becomes important that we also have to see how Britain doesn't when Britain was able to everything is about having a monopoly on something, right? So that's why the United States is hey, we need to invade Mexico because we need to make it safe, but also Mexico just found lithium, right, which is needed to make Tesla batteries, among other things. And so if we went in there, then we could secure it. And also the fact that we're having like a economic spat, right, between the presidents, right, because Mexico doesn't want to just have it be open for private investment, where instead they'd rather have the United States invest into the Mexican government and then, then do it like that, is still, is still part of that. Anyone noticing? Oh yeah. Exactly. It shouldn't be this big of a leap to say this, like what you're trying to analogize, when literally they compare the drug cartels to ISIS, right, which is like linked to Al Qaeda, right, and all of that stuff. Like they're making these comparisons to try to demonize a country that literally, like, Mexico has had, and this might be the largest in the world, but I'm not completely certain, but like the amount of people that moved to the United States from Mexico during the revolution and like escaping the revolution, right, the violence of the revolution, and also just after that, was such a high proportion. Like it was like almost a fifth of the people, like they came to the United States of the population at the time. And so, that's, again, remember, let's see here, what is this? Elon, we will coup whoever we want. Bolivia stopped them from mining in their country. I'd say they dealt with it pretty well. It wasn't in the best interest of the people. The U.S. government, we will coup whoever we want, that's essentially the way how they see, the way how it's supposed to be. That's the reason why they have no problem, with, there's actually a movie that's really good. It's really good in the sense that what it shows, like the dystopian future it shows, is pretty much how it already works, right? But there are some aspects that are still a bit, haven't come to pass yet. But we're essentially there, right? Like we're essentially at that point, where America militarizes its borders so much so that it instead finds a way to use robots, I guess, and I guess like metaverse technology in order to be able to get the cheap labor it wants on the Mexican side of the border, but to no longer have to have Mexicans be laborers in the United States, right? Like that's their dream, right? That's their goal, right? Like how do we have the labor without the labor force, so to speak? Because then it makes one of their contradictions of like, how can you have people working, paying taxes, doing all of these things for the society, for the bourgeois society you have, but you won't extend them even the most basic bourgeois rights, right, which are, citizenship, etc. And obviously it's done for multiple reasons, right? One of those is to not pay them correctly, extinction, essentially what ends up happening is that the walled world, or in this case the United States, they, like, everybody who is in the United States essentially gets kind of even more indoctrinated into like U.S. supremacy, I guess, like more into that. And then, so like people no longer identify with, me, because I live now in the United States, therefore I could no longer identify with Mexico, right? And that's one of the things that that happens in the movie is that they even make it into a game show. I'm not spoiling anything. This is literally like the first 5 minutes of the movie. There's a game show, and it's like a military game show essentially, right? Where it's like they are, the U.S. Air Force, what are they going to strike next? And they think that it's like a simulation, but it's actually them. It's like it's taking that Baudrillard texts, right? The Gulf War did not take place, and other things that he's written, and taking it a step further, right? Where it's like war has become so hyper real, and we live in such depths of hyper reality that, you know, we would watch something like that show and think that it's not real, right? I think Trump got the idea to build the wall from Attack on Titan. Man, watched the whole anime and missed the point. Yeah, that's funny. Yes, I could see that. I could see that. You know, like, okay. It was funny because Zara was noticing that, like, I'm getting weird recommendations on a whole bunch of stuff, and it's just like I knew one of the recommendations came about because we watched Giga Chad, because the title of it said Giga Chad, right? Like, I was just like, oh yeah, that makes sense, Giga Chad. So just to give me a quick second here while I go try to find something for us to watch. Oh, I'm actually surprised. Macron survived the no confidence vote. Wow, I'm surprised. I'm really surprised about that. But I mean, then again, maybe I shouldn't have been so like, oh yeah, they're gonna want to get rid of him, because I mean, he gives the right people power, right? And so
the Great Pyramid.
That Giga Chad, is that Giga Chad thing ironic with that guy? He's so not Chad. No, it is ironic. That's the whole point, and that's why, like, one of the emotes that we want to have. What happened, JJ? Is the fact that we want to have a Habsburg chin emote. So I'm trying to find. Actually, let me see if I can find it right now. Like, I essentially want to make an emote of, like, Philip the Fair, I want to say that's what his name is. Like, see how... and so that way we can measure, because we have a measurement of scale, right? That is to say, this is Emperor Charles V, right? So in essence, what we want to do is, and Adadak brought this up, is that we want to make a Habsburg chin emote because we want to be able to rate these Giga Chads, Mega Chads, etc. Using a measurement system known as the Habsburg chin system, right? How many Habsburg chins have they earned for themselves? La France est tout aussi mauvaise que les États-Unis. Oui, exactement, mais en même temps, nous avons besoin de reconnaître que la gauche française n'est pas exactement comme la gauche française aux années 60, c'est-à-dire nous avons des différentes choses pour exprimer quand on a besoin de parler de la France. Heureusement, les manifestations à Paris sont importantes, et aussi toutes les manifestations en toute la France. Mais en même temps, quand nous ne pouvons pas penser que les Français veulent changer leur système en totalité. C'est ça le problème. S'ils veulent, ils peuvent changer leur système complètement. N'est-ce pas nécessaire avoir un vote, la vote de confiance et tout ça? Nous avons des citoyens révolutionnaires, au moment révolutionnaire, et nous sommes ici. Nous sommes ici. Et pourquoi? Alors, je pense qu'il y a des efforts dans la gauche française pour avoir un moment révolutionnaire, vraiment révolutionnaire, mais en même temps, nous avons besoin de se souvenir que la majorité de la gauche française n'est pas vraiment communiste, n'est pas vraiment socialiste. Sont des démocrates sociaux qui veulent des choses seulement pour améliorer sa vie. Mais maintenant, pas des autres choses. C'est très drôle qu'ils peuvent manifester pour la pension de vieillesse, mais pas les musulmans et les sikhs qui n'ont pas le droit de porter leurs vêtements traditionnels au travail. Exactement. Les musulmans, les sikhs et aussi les juifs, toutes les religions et toutes les cultures qui ne sont pas séculaires, alors sont destinés à être, comment dit-on, oui, la laïcité, c'est la chose plus importante. Mais pourquoi ça n'est pas important quand ça vient à des manifestants maintenant? Je sais pas. Parce que, obviously, la culture française est culturellement chrétienne. Mais pour les autres religions, pour les autres cultures, qu'est-ce qui a changé? Chose. Ça, c'est la raison que beaucoup de personnes de la France ont émigré aux États-Unis, particulièrement les orthodoxes. Nous avons besoin d'une vote de confiance pour Biden. Littéralement, je suis prêt pour ça. Ça, c'est sorry, I realized that we just suddenly moved into French, which, again, I love speaking French. But ça, c'est la raison que le président de Mexique a dit que Mexique a un mécanisme au Mexique que c'est la révocation de mandat, c'est-à-dire à la moitié de, parce que les présidents au Mexique ont seulement un terme de 6 ans, ça s'appelle un sexenio, et le président de ce moment, AMLO, a ajouté ce mécanisme de révocation de mandat, où à 3 ans, dans la moitié exactement du terme présidentiel, le peuple peut dire s'ils veulent retourner avec le même mandat, avec le président, ou changer. Les États-Unis n'ont pas ça. Parce que pour nous, c'est-à-dire aux États-Unis, changer un président, c'est une question politique dans le chambre des représentatifs, dans le Sénat des États-Unis, n'est-ce pas, par le peuple. So, yes, sorry, okay, sorry. Like I said, I like to I like to talk in French. It's one of those languages I like. So, okay. Nods. Aber du kannst sprechen in Deutsch. Nein, deaf to the opposition. Ich denke, Entschuldigung, kannst dich sehen. Woher kommst du? Anyway. So now we're going to talk about pyramids. I'm going to leave this playing. I have to go to the
of Giza, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the statue of Zeus at Olympia.
Oh, I thought you could speak German because you said danke, so that's why I assumed. Anyway, no worries. I'm fluent in English. Apparently my first language was German because of my grandmother, but I speak a little bit of Spanish, I guess. Well, same. I mean, that's how I've been my whole life. I want to learn every language. I want to learn everything. Like, especially one thing I like to do is if I know I see other people, like when I'm traveling, that are having a difficult time, I like to try to help, people that, are honestly having real issues, especially when they could be helped by someone who, perhaps, could help alleviate a situation that is that has a lot of tension because of other reasons, right? Especially, like, this has especially been the case when I've helped Chinese tourists is that a lot of European places will like be mad at them just for being Chinese and being tourists, but they still need to communicate with them. And so, that's the reason why it's like sometimes being there to kind of translate or to sometimes can help diffuse the situation, but you just have to handle it right. Because again, like there's no reason for them to hate on anybody, but they do it because of racist and other reasons. So sometimes it can be useful to be there to try to advocate for them, and because I speak Mandarin and Italian or French or whatever, it can work. So ici au Canada, le premier ministre, s'il réalise qu'il n'est pas populaire, peut toujours annoncer une autre élection. C'est pas parfait, je pense que c'est le peuple qui doit avoir le droit de décider quand on refait des élections. Exactement. Et ça, c'est la raison que au Mexique, ils ont changé cette particularité de la Constitution pour avoir un vote nécessaire chaque sexennie, chaque 6 ans, terme de 6 ans. Aux 3 ans, si vous voudriez changer le président, vous pouvez le voter et arrêter leur mandat. This happens to a lot of deaf people. They are just trying to be understood. See, what's so interesting about that is that my mom has had to work with, I don't want to get too into it, but like obviously for obvious reasons, but one of the things that she's done is like, so she can speak some sign language, and that's because she's always helped like teaching smaller children, because she does like psychology and stuff, like developmental stuff, particularly when it comes to making sure that special education children are able to get the appropriate care and all, but also get the appropriate attention within a classroom that they need. And exactly. And so that is why like my mom will teach the whole class, like everybody, so then that way all of the young kids, right, all of the little so as I said, so that's kind of what that happened. So my mom will taught all of the little kids, so that way they all know how to ask for the restroom using sign language, right, where you raise your hand, like restroom, or if you want water, or things like that, because something as basic as asking for a glass of water or using the restroom can be they as in exactly, like I just hate that a lot of schools would rather get rid of the people who are professionals in dealing with special needs children and instead just say, well, we can stick them in a classroom with everybody else, and if they do something wrong, then we'll think about putting them in their own classroom, right? And it's just like, no, like, but I mean, there's nothing I can do, there's nothing she can do, unfortunately, because she doesn't work at that place anymore, at that school. So that was a nightmare during lockdown, remote learning. Oh yeah, I can imagine. Sometimes I can't speak, so she taught me to sign. Oh, okay, I get that. That's awesome. Black people be like that sometimes when they start speaking Jula. I remember when I was like younger, and I remember that I was trying hard to learn Xhosa, right? Because I had heard some songs from some people I knew, but then instead I was kind of like somehow started to learn like Amharic, because it's related to Hebrew and Arabic, because they're both Afro-Asiatic languages. And so it's like I just love learning languages. I mean, if there was a way I could know all languages ever, I would. Saw endless compilations of teachers getting mad at students that were either deaf or hard of hearing. Oh yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that my mom worked to avoid, is like, let's not allow that to happen in the first place, right? Like, the teachers are already stressed enough, right? Like, as an educator, I can tell you, it's stressful, right? And we already have to deal with, all of these other things. But when people have particular needs, they need to be given, as much support as possible during the school day and afterwards and before, etc. So my mom would actually even drive her students, right, or the students that she would work with, to other appointments that they had to do. Like the school let her use one of the vans, and she would and she would drive them herself to where they needed to go if they needed to go somewhere after school, because the school wouldn't do it. The school buses, the school district buses, aren't going to do it, because if it's outside of their district, they don't care. But like I said, then they would rather get rid of a person that's there to provide that service than and instead get more new teachers and get rid of teachers that are almost about to reach seniority, right? The governor of New York liked the idea of 300 students being taught by a single teacher. Oh, no. Even in universities, even the huge lecture halls that I've been into, even they need TAs just to do, doctors get mad at people being told horrible things and it takes too long to explain in sign language and they have questions. Oh yeah. That's also, yeah. And they say we have interpretation services, but it takes a while to find someone, right? Which is why there's a journal that I know that currently, and again, this is tangentially related, but that they will publish and they will find people to publish academic articles in indigenous languages of the Americas. It doesn't matter if it's in Navajo, if it's in Nahuatl, if it's in Mayan, if it's in if it's in Purepecha, if it's in, Quechua or Aymara, it does not matter. They will find someone to publish your article. They do not want you to feel compelled to write in English or to write in any other language that you don't want to. ASL should be taught to all children. I completely agree. Arabic, what I studied when I was younger too, the Jordanian dialect, but I never heard of Hossa. So Hossa has three clicks, as they like to call them, right? So it has the C, and then it has the Q, and then it has the X, and so Hossa is spelt. So as I said, this one is this. So it's pronounced Hossa, and it's spoken in South Africa mostly. But yeah, it's one of those. It has the three clicks: the C, Q, and then X. They taught our kindergarten class a Christmas song in sign language. In our class, I learned it in one day, and I still found. Oh yeah. It's funny you say that, because I remember when I was much younger, I went to a school that if you made it all when you got to the high school level, right? So this was it had 7th, 8th, whatever, and then it had 9th and 10th, I think, or something. But when you got to the 9th and 10th grades, you could take Japanese. And so, I knew some people that were in the, the upper classes, upperclassmen, so to speak. And they actually said that they actually had a song they were supposed to learn, and that they were having a tough time memorizing it. And it was Mary Had a Little Lamb, but in Japanese. And then I took it and I memorized it, and I still remember it to this day. Marisa no haitsuji, 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 Marisa no haitsuji, kawaii. So I still remember it. For us, ASL is actually a mandatory course in high school. It's pretty good. I'm decently fluent. Yeah, like I said, remember, in California, they love to just be oh yeah, this, what they do in California is they take away money from the school district. They see that then the school suffers, right? And then they say, oh, look at how bad the school is doing. I guess we need to take away even more money, right? And that's essentially what they've been doing since the 70s. The only victory that I know of, and that's because my grandmother and my family were particularly part of the movement to make bilingual education legal, because they actually had banned it in California, was when they did that. Because again, my parents my grandparents in particular wanted to make sure that bilingual education would always be available for, for Chicanes, because again, like there are many families that are from here in California that are, indigenous in the sense, in the technical historical sense of like they were living here when the United States took over this land. So like there's no reason for them to have to give up anything, right? But again, that this is why the definition of indigenous is like different in different contexts. But that is one of the things that I mean, I have so many books about this, just talking about LA, because like LA is a city that it's like it's such a Mexican city in one sense, right? But when it comes to East LA, but like it's so connected to the rest of the history of Mexico as well. Not only from its colonial times, because it was one of the cities that actually was founded during Spanish colonial times, but also interculturally, right? Like it's a melting pot of different populations in the U.S., but also different populations from Mexico, and then Tijuana, which is in Baja, is also the same way. Like in fact, Tijuana now has immigrant communities of Koreans, some of these were already older. Like in Tijuana, they actually have there's already a well-established Chinese community. And I remember that once a friend of mine, and this is so funny. So my friend who had never been to Mexico, right? Like this is the thing. They had never been to Mexico. I already said it? Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah. So they had never been to Mexico, and they went with me to this Chinese restaurant, right? And I kid you not, like they spoke to them in English. Like kind of in this like, oh, they're gonna take my order kind of way, right? And the girl was like, ¿qué? Like she was like complete, like to him the idea of being Chinese and Mexican are like two, like being in the United States is one thing, but Chinese people in Mexico, it's like somehow his brain couldn't get around it. And so when we went there, I just remember that he kept trying to like say things in English, and they were like, we don't speak English, like we're Mexicans, but because he's used to, again, like how Chinese people are presented in LA, etc. But yeah, it is, and San Diego is too. In fact, San Diego, it's really interesting. San Diego actually has a distinctively Mexican Jewish community. That is to say that like when I lived in San Diego for a while, and I didn't live anywhere nice anyway, so I lived in like National City, all that stuff, San Isidro, etc. Like their community is like the only like one that's distinctively has a Mexican character to it. But again, I refrain from trying to give it all of that credit because so many of the people are Ashkenazi. Not that that matters, but that it's that they will try to, is that while they identify with Mexico, they also will try to identify themselves with whiteness in U.S. terms, and it just doesn't work that way, right? Like, not all Jews are white, but the Ashkenazi Jews that have been assimilated into whiteness in the United States are. And so, like, they like to straddle that line a lot, and even though they're completely white, but because they're called, like, Gerardo Cohen, right? I just made that name up. Like, they like that they're able to straddle, like, the Latinx, Chicanx line and the, Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I used to live in Chula Vista. That's where I used to live. So trust me, I mean, like, like I already told you, like, I grew up in South Central and Compton. Like, that's where I'm from. That's the reason why, like, sometimes it's like, I don't want to slip, don't want to, like, start just talking in the way how, people talk from both of those areas, because I almost feel like, like people are used to me talking in a certain way, but like the need to code switch, just, I feel it, because it's like, I'm so used to being like, speaking in that way, because that's how I grew up, Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Plagued by Society. Thank you so much for the follow. Yeah, because sometimes I'm like, I don't want to, because again, like AAVE, Spanglish, etc., like this mishmash, So, it's this really interesting, like, girl, you know what you about to do. I already know what you about to do, like, it just comes out too easily, because it's just like, that's how I grew up, like, that's how I grew up, like, just, like, the idea of, like, oh, don't worry, I'm not, trust me. I mean, both of those areas are enormous. Hi, Playboy Society, it's good to see you here. And also, yeah, don't worry. So, pretty much, like, that's one of the things that I've always noticed is, like, like, I just remember, like, going around to, like, the corner stores and stuff with, like, my friends, and, like, the idea of living in a place where everyone is exactly the same just does not fly with me, because I've always grown up in places where there's all sorts of people, all of that, right? And it's just like, like, I've just never really liked living in places where, like, everyone is just, there's no, like, I liked knowing that there's a Mexican restaurant, but that there's also, I'm obviously, just using this as an example, but I also like knowing that, like, oh, if I go to my friend's house, like, oh, I'm gonna get, Nigerian food, or if I go to this friend's house, that I can go and we can eat Thai food, and, from northern Thailand or whatever it might be, specifically. Yeah, OMG, my little brother, OMG, he picks up the phone normal, but as soon as he hears my voice, he gets this special tone. Yeah. I totally get that. And yeah, sure, we can talk later offline. Yeah, no, it's like, I don't know, it's like right away, just kind of just, like, I try to be as professional sounding as possible, but sometimes I'm just like, oh Lord, like, here we go, like, like, do not even start with me, because I'm about to just go over there, you know what I mean? Like, I'm about to go over there, like, it all wants to come out sometimes, and it's just like, because again, that's how I grew up talking, like, that's how everyone around me talks. So I'm gonna leave this playing for a little bit, because I have to use the restroom, but I will be right back.
The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, the Colossus of Rhodes, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria. We call them the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a very selective list describing engineering feats and architectural masterpieces that need to be seen to be believed. But who actually came up with this list? And why is it only possible to visit just one of them today? Did the rest of the wonders even exist? In order to get to the truth behind this iconic list, we need to investigate where it came from, who made it, and why it's become so iconic. Then, because it's a Dig It with Raven video, we're going to take a deep dive into each one and go beyond the glamour and the mystique. We're going to be looking at the people who had the vision to create monuments that brought the whole world to their knees. We'll be reading the ancient sources who wrote about them thousands of years ago, and looking at the archaeological evidence from excavations at the sites where they once stood in order to bring them back to life. The 7 wonders of the ancient world might not have been these fantasy-like places that people during the Renaissance liked to believe, but they could have been real places that created the ultimate ancient Mediterranean bucket list. Let's start with a simple question. Why? Why were these legendary monuments built? And why, thousands of years ago, did people decide to list out the best of the best in their known world? Well, a simple question deserves a simple answer. It is a very human thing to compete with nature. We see it everywhere today, and it is something that we've been doing for a really long time. The natural world has already created sites that humanity marvels at. Waterfalls, mountains, rock formations that defy gravity, and humans, for whatever reason, want to join in on the fun and build something that can elevate themselves to or even go beyond nature. Architects, masons, and sculptors are driven to express themselves in ways that have never been done before and create something that will immortalize both them and their civilization. We can see this today in people's missions to build the world's tallest skyscraper or entirely self-sufficient walled city.
So, yeah, hello, welcome, Playwright Society. La Jolla, oh, okay, yeah. my only special tone is when my dad calls. I thought she was talking about playing the game Civ. Oh yeah. I want to go to the beach now. I totally feel you. Like, that's the one thing I've been hating about all of this rain here in California is that, like, I went to Hermosa Beach, like, thank you so much, Zara. Also, by the way, I just want to say a big thank you to Armad and to my friend, whom I honestly think is one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. And I'm saying this because I mean it, Zara. I want to just thank you so much for helping me set up this overlay. Thank you. I truly appreciate all of your help that you've given me, you know. Truly do. And so I just want to, like, give you a nice little round of applause and thank you. I wish I could re-ingratiate you enough, but I honestly don't know how. Yeah, it's new. Before it looked very different. Because I've been using different software like every single week essentially. But yeah, Zara was the one that helped me. She helped me set this all up, and so here we are. Also, I don't know if people have actually read about Neom, but it's essentially like a really bad idea. Oh, thank you. And no, I mean, you're just great, Azera. You're so great. That's why I love talking with you, spending time with you. I don't know, have people heard of Neom? So essentially they want to build this city that's like 2 parallel walls of like essentially glass, and they go on for like 30 miles or something like that, and then like the entire city is like compacted between these 2 walls, but instead of being like compacted in like a circular space, we'll say like this, instead it would just be like a really long, thin city. So I really don't get the attraction, but that's just me. I don't know. Maybe you guys can sell me on this. Maybe you can sell me on this.
Cities in the desert. Huge building projects don't normally start with the aim to be boring and functional. People want an emotional response to a piece of art. That wow factor, that wonder. Now you get it. The 7 wonders of the ancient world weren't immediately classified as wonders right off the bat, nor were the 7 we know.
Yeah, they want to make a Wakanda bubble but long. Yeah, pretty much. The worst thing about it is that they would have the transportation services still like run down the middle, and everyone would just live on top of each other, like, you know, like everything. And I'm just thinking, I cannot imagine how classist like the housing differences would be, right? Like, I'm just trying to imagine, like, okay, so where are the rich white people gonna live, right? You know, like that's what I'm thinking. Like, okay, they're gonna get the actual like sunlight and everything, and then like the peasants, you know, if people even like that can even live there, right? Like the workers, they would probably live like way in the back, and you know, all of that stuff. Yeah, this novel, yeah, for the privilege only, exactly.
Of today, the 7 that made everyone's list. Instead, they were listed as sights to be seen by ancient Greek writers under the Greek word theamata, which translates to things to be seen. Yep, the list of the 7 wonders started off as a travel blog. The top things to see in the ancient Mediterranean. I mean, I have to laugh a bit at this. Here we are marveling at these monuments that don't even exist anymore and holding this list up to the highest regard when we look at the ancient world. And all it really was a bunch of ancient Greek people writing Lonely Planet guides. It also makes sense now that the list of wonders
Another thing too is it does sound claustrophobic. That is true. And if they're gonna have cars, I feel like they address the verticality of dystopian architecture in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? That's true. So one thing that is being talked about here is that, one thing I also wanted to mention is that we don't know, like when they talk about the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, we're almost certain that they didn't mean the Babylon that we know of like today. Like if you go to Iraq, you can visit Babylon, but the Hanging Gardens didn't exist there. Like there are no mentions of Hanging Gardens being there, and we already explored how Hanging Gardens are hanging in the sense that they go down Like it's not like a step pyramid going up with gardens. No, it's like an amphitheater going down with gardens. And so that's how it would have looked like. It would have looked more like terraces, right? Kind of like, I don't want to say exactly like, but like, when people like to show the pictures of like rice paddies in China, right, where they're going down the mountain, right, it's staggered like that. It would have kind of resembled that, but it would have had trees, and it would have tried to remake a sort of mountain atmosphere. But the ones in Babylon most likely did not exist, and the reason why is because different Greek writers said that would use the name Babylon to describe multiple places. One of those was Nineveh, which is up in the north of Iraq, and there they did have, exactly, they hang from each step down, and so Nineveh does have hanging gardens, and they were well known. So we're pretty sure, at least we can say with some certainty, again, not with complete certainty, but just, with all the evidence we have, that it would have been Nineveh, because that was the old capital anyway, and it also was a much more important city historically, and it actually know it had hanging gardens.
Varied somewhat from person to person in their writings, just like different travel blog sites do today. But in all seriousness, it does make sense, as we use travel guides all the time, so why wouldn't ancient people do the same? So how did these bucket list tourist sites become wonders as we know them today? Well, as people started to visit and, quote, wonder at their impressiveness, it became common to refer to them as such. And it was really not that difficult for the ancient Greeks, because the word for wonder is Thaumata. Not the hardest change of titles from Theamata, is it? Over the next centuries, people traveled around the ancient Mediterranean.
Also, like, the word thematics comes from the original, like the Theamata, that which is to be beheld or to be seen, right? That's why, like, I've always found it really interesting, because like when people talk about like what are the thematic aspects of X thing, it's like, what are the things that are apparent is a really good way of rewording that. Like, what is it that you're trying to show, right? That's what is best meant by themata or thematics now.
To see these sites and others that were built during their lifetimes. The list evolved and varied from person to person, and it wasn't until the Renaissance that this list as we know it today was finalized as the ultimate top 7 of the ancient world. You might think that the current list of the 7 wonders of the ancient world was created by some holier-than-thou governing body or committee traveling around every year and judging the best new architectural feats of the day and updating that list accordingly. And when you look at them all on a map, it may seem a little biased, as they're concentrated around one general area. And this is because of where the writings of these wonders lists were coming from. That brings me to my next question. Who wrote these lists? Who was the main...
Again, like, one of the things that is also really important too is, I remember once I've already mentioned this before, but if you know who Joma is, right? Jose Maria Sison. He's one of the members of the Filipino Communist Party, and recently passed away, and was is seen as very important for their struggle in particular, right, in the Philippines. Wrote an introduction into the principles of an introduction or something like that of Marxism-Leninism, right? I actually got to go and teach at his alma mater in the department that he was in, anyway, this is a whole different point. But the whole point being that when I went to the bookstore to try to find just like a travel guide in general, it's interesting which countries or which areas of the world they do not stock up on. And one of those I found out was the Philippines. Like, almost nowhere will you find a travel log or a travel book, like Lonely Planet or DK guides, etc. Will you find one that is about the Philippines or about Papua New Guinea or about many different parts of the world, but it's very interesting to see which ones they choose to exclude and which ones they choose to like over include, which is always Western European. Like they will have like 50 Parises, Al Urdun, Al Iraq, my daddy Barak, vacation, we're drinking whiskey on the rocks.
Major influencer who started the trend of listing off the best places in the world? For that answer, we have to go all the way back to the OG travel influencer, Herodotus. He was probably the one who laid the foundations for the Ancient Wonders list in his big book, Histories, written in the mid-5th century BCE. Herodotus was born in 484 BCE at Halicarnassus, which is modern-day Bodrum in Turkey, and one of his favorite things was to marvel at the achievements of the Greek and other Eastern civilizations. Herodotus is also known as the father of lies, so no one's sure how much of his work we can take super seriously, but he
what's really funny is that Herodotus does this thing in his histories where he essentially says like, oh, this guy told me this. Like everything I'm about to tell you, oh, this guy told me. Right? Like he tries to get out of, being a responsible historian by saying, well, that's just, the lie daddy, yes. Because I know people that try to act like, oh yes, that will try to read his histories as like historical, in the same way how you can read like historical texts to this day. But his history is a hermeneutical process. Like histories written more currently are better informed than ones that were written 2,500 years ago. But there are many people that will say, well, Herodotus was the original historian and blah, blah, blah. But again, like most of what he says either isn't true, like we know it isn't true, either from contemporary sources that were in the same areas, because a lot of it is just presumed, like, he did travel to XYZ place, and 2, he did see XYZ thing. But the main thing is, very, very weaselly. Weasel Herodotus. And so that's one of the things that has always been kind of an issue when it comes to Herodotus and people that want to take him very seriously. I mean, just let me put it to you this way. I know that even very devout Christians will say we probably should not read the New Testament, or the Christian Bible, as I prefer to call it, as like necessarily historically accurate, right? Like that's not the point of it, right? Like you're not reading it for history, right? Again, I'm just saying, I know that there are people that would perhaps take that position. But taking Herodotus, which is 5 centuries earlier than even the earliest manuscript, actually almost 600 years before the earliest manuscript to have ever existed of, any Christian text, means that, again, like, there are a lot of issues when it comes to that. And so one of those things is that he tries to sort of get off scot-free by saying, well, I'm just telling you what this Egyptian guy said, right? So if it's wrong, it's because he's wrong, but
he was definitely the first guy in ancient Greece to write down his marvelings of the ancient Mediterranean. And boy, did he love to marvel. When he was alive, only 2 of the ancient wonders on the current list would have existed: the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. So if he did have his own Mediterranean bucket list, we have no idea what else could have been on it. Ooh, mystery. What have we not found yet? The suspense. Size mattered with Homer, and he loved writing about the big things like the pyramids and the massive city walls of Babylon. And it seems like he started a trend because each of the 7 wonders of the ancient world all have this in common. Their size was so large that it gave everyone a sense of awe and wonder. Making a list of places.
And I mean, that's still kind of held in the same way today. Like, people want to go to Dubai to go to the world's tallest building, right? I mean, like, Dubai, the Burj Dubai is actually so high up. Like, it's so tall that if you were to watch the sunset at ground level and then get on the elevator and go up to the top floor, you would see the sunset again. Like, that's how, that's how high up it is, and that's how much of an angle you would have to be able to see it twice. And so I think that, like a lot of those things are, like that seems cool, but I just really don't, like I can't think of, like from what I've heard of Dubai, it seems to me kind of like Las Vegas in many ways. Like, it's like, because, in the sense that like there's just lots of shopping and lots of, but again, it's really not, like it's not really a place that like, it's more of a place where like very wealthy people go, right? Like that's more what the type of people that tend to go to Dubai, because then they try to open like bank accounts and all of that stuff where they can invest their money and all of that. But yeah, I can't think of any like specific, besides those towers that they have, and the 7-star hotel they have in Abu Dhabi. But yeah, I'm trying to think like where else is known for. What else would be? Like I guess you could say Persepolis could also make it on that list too, even though like Alexander destroyed it and then like he set it on fire and regretted it instantly. Which I'm just thinking like, why destroy Persepolis? Like it doesn't make any sense to me. But whatever, he did it, and it is what it is now, I guess. But then you also have the sort of like other way of how the Europeans did it. Like when they colonized the New World, they were willing to dismantle, like I said, like El Templo Mayor in Mexico City, and instead reuse it to build a cathedral, right? So it's like, like, yeah, there's awe, but how much of that awe really exists to this day because of the fact that so much of what is the cultural patrimony of different nations is often, one, undervalued. Hi. Hello, Sam. It's so good to see you. Thank you so much for making it to the stream today. So, like I said, like I guess I'm trying to think of what would be like the closest monumental architecture that is not like a tall building, right? I'm trying to think of that people would want to go see now.
To visit became a lot more possible and popular after Alexander the Great showed up on the scene. When ATG, as I like to call him, famously crossed the Hellespont in 334 BCE to free Greek cities that were under Persian control, and then, well, he conquered all of Persia, and the Greek world became linked with the East, and a lot of things really opened up. People were able to travel freely around the entire area and share ideas and cultures. You might have heard of the spread of Hellenism, which was the spread of Greek culture and language throughout the Near East and Asia. We make it sound so romantic today, but it's just another example of ancient colonization, something that has happened a lot throughout history. Even in the centuries after the death of Alexander, the world became a lot more open for wealthy travelers, and this is when we see so many ancient wonder bucket.
Right, again, I had to verify my account, just say, oh, yeah, it's just there for, safety reasons and all that. But I'm glad that you were able to say hello, so I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, like, one thing is that if you, like, once essentially you have that union between, like, this is the one thing about, Alexander. It's like, like really the main thing that he really took over, I guess you could say Egypt as well, but like really it's just was the Persian Empire, but not to whatever, but it just seems to me like he's given all this credit for being this like conqueror, when really the only empire he really conquered was the Persian Empire, which was like, because he united Greece under one, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't seem so special if you think of it in terms that like Greece would have done this anyway at some point. Like if they would have united under another king or whatever, that they would have tried to do much the same. But I think that one of the things is like, yeah, ancient travelers like to come up with their own lists. And in fact, I actually know someone who has a list of the places they want to go to visit, and they're almost done filling it out. I think the last place they went to that they had never been to before was Venice. And now they need to go to like Beijing, I think, or something like that, or Shanghai. And I don't know if they're going to visit soon or when, but like Chad, do you have like a list of places, like like a bucket list, kind of like these ancient writers did? Like, oh, I mean, I know a lot of these ancient writers went to the places and then wrote about them, whereas now usually we write about them because we want to go there. But what are some places that like are on your list if you have one? Like, where are the places you guys would want to visit, where you all would want to visit, if you guys were to go to like the marvels of the world? Like, what are the marvels of the world that you guys would want to see? Yeah, there are way, way, way too many reactionary trolls. Way too many. So, it's just better to, Norway, China. I want to go to the Philippines. Oh yeah, the Philippines is, I mean, all I have to say is the Philippines is, it's, wow, it's so beautiful. Like, even, like, I remember going, so I stayed in Quezon City, because that's where Makati is, or pardon me, yeah, Makati? Yeah, I think that's what it's called. No, Diliman, which is the University of the Philippines. And so I stayed at sort of in that area, but right there you can see much more, like, you can go out of the Manila, like directly out of the Manila area, and you can see, like the mountains and all of that stuff. And one thing that's really interesting is you can see a lot of old buildings that aren't like seen as historically important, but they're like built by the Spanish or whatever, during their colonial era, sometimes even really early in the colonial era. That are like still in use to this day, by landowners, right? Particularly like houses and stuff like that. Sometimes you'll see ruins, but a lot of times like the ruins will be used, like the stone from ruins will be used by, local people to build their own houses, which is kind of like the way how it's worked throughout history. So, in a way, I'm kind of glad they don't classify them as like important historical sites. But some of them, like, they've essentially been there since, 17 something. Norway, China. There's a handful of places in Japan I want to see, and lots of parts of Seoul. In South Korea, yeah. I also want to go to Ireland, and I'd love to go to England again, because the last time I went, I was 2 years old. Oh, I get that. My uncle is married to a woman from there. He's like my uncle, but like 20 years younger than my dad, so only like 15 years older than me. And his wife is 10 years his junior, so she's like kind of my but she showed me photos of the land her grandparents have in their village. Ooh, it's in the mountains. Ooh, is it in Luzon? Is it like on the biggest island, or is it one of the other islands? I guess the last time I went, I was 11 years old. Maybe either way, the last time I went to England, it was with parents and it wasn't fun. Yeah. The last time I was in England, I was doing literally like a Shakespeare run, like in the sense that they were going to do a lot of like celebrations for the 400th commemoration. Oh yeah, no, I totally understand. Like, not interested in man-made structures complete under colonialism. I understand that, but my point was more like, it's interesting the fact that if you go to Manila, they will, like, they've preserved, specific places, but like, even in terms of like a historical, right, like there are no museums of like the plantations that existed, right, to sort of talk about the horrors of colonization and imperialism, etc. Like, I don't disagree with you that, I don't care about the buildings themselves, right, as such. It's more that like they are not put in context, and I find that, that can lead to, people, forgetting a lot of the issues that have happened over time. Because for me, I'm all about, preserving history and trying to make sure that like the scars and pains of colonialism and imperialism are actually spoken about, actually worked with, right? But yeah, I understand what you're saying, Sam. The worst trolls are just libs. Oh yeah. I'm too socially nervous to travel. If I could go, I'd go pretty much anywhere. Oh, I get that. I mean, me too. Like, I have no, like, restriction, like, as such on going anywhere. It's more that, like, you know, it costs a lot of money. Like, I know that there are, like, tickets to go around the world and all of that, but I don't know if they still, like, one, they're expensive, right? One, they're expensive, and two, you can only stop in like so many places, like, and you can only go like one direction or something, which, you know, that doesn't matter to me, but it's like there are many places that I want to visit that I would want to spend a lot of time in, you know? Like, I've always wanted to visit Africa and stay and visit multiple countries and be able to actually get to know various cultures and things like that. Whereas, you know, the way how tourism works is like, you go to a place for a week, maybe you can, you know, maybe you can go to some places outside in the environs of wherever you're at. You know, maybe if you're in London, you can get the train to go to Paris or whatever. But like when it comes to places like Africa or you know, South Asia, etc., Southeast Asia, you know, I would like to have time to be able to actually explore those countries. You know, I have a new JavaScript program I wrote that will stop follow bots. I sent it to Twitch for approval, and they give me the authentication. I have now tested on my own channel, but they should make this type. Oh, sorry, you were responding to someone. If your mods can't write JavaScript, yeah. And the thing is, if I like to travel local, so a cruise ship or something would be out of the question. And a lot of people do stuff like that just blow through a bunch of countries at once. Right, exactly. Like, you know, it's like cruises, you know, it's like they drop you off in very specific, you know, they see, you know, like, oh, they'll drop you off in Barcelona, they'll drop you off in Marseille, they'll drop you off in Genoa, you know, and Naples and stuff like that. But, like, you don't really get to see the places because you only get a day, right? Like, you only get so many hours that you can, I mean, like, there is no way you can explore any city, right? Like, especially not like a city like Lagos or Lagos, whichever way you want to emphasize the word, or rather the name of the city, or you know, Accra, or you know, like if you want to even go to places like Cabinda, right, that are like out of the way but that are really interesting, or you want to actually visit, you know, the DRC and actually get a chance to visit areas that are outside of Kinshasa, you know, like it's difficult. I'm the worst mod. I don't know how to do anything except ban, timeout, shoutouts, and commands. A lot of times you're only allowed to go to places they tell you can go as well, and I'm kind of the person that I want to go explore, I want to check out the local group. Exactly. Like, that's I mean, again, I don't want to, like, oh, you know, but, like, I have heard that, you know, like, there is a difference between a tourist and a traveler, right, as such, right? Like, for example, like, when I was in Syria or in Jordan, like, I was as connected to as I could be, right? To the locals as much as I could, right? Like, that was the main thing, is I didn't want to just be some guy from, you know, Mexico or from the United States or whatever that was just, like, seeing places almost through that lens of, like, almost like that museum gaze, right? Like, looking at it in that weird lens that a lot of American tourists like to look things through, right? And so I kind of don't have that, which is probably why I always end up, like, in yeah, I went to Syria and Jordan, yes. I went, so... So yeah, like I said, I have been to Syria and Jordan. Both of them were great. I really liked the, like, if you know, the weather is really, really nice in both countries actually, and there's so much to do. if you can. I mean, I know right now I don't think you can really travel to Syria right now, but definitely Jordan is really nice. I have a cousin in Italy, and she keeps asking me to go visit, but that isn't the top of my bucket list. I mean, hey, having family there, that's helpful, because then there's a lot you can explore that you probably couldn't, if you're just gonna be there for a week, or so, because like most people I know, in fact, I actually know someone who, I'm not even joking, said that they spend too much time abroad, so they want to have shorter vacations, and I'm just like, I mean, okay, if you want to have a 4-day vacation in France, that's fine, but it's just like, yeah, I couldn't cross the border when I was in Amman. I did help people get over the border, that's why we were there. Oh, that was in 2012, yeah, I was there in 2017, so you can imagine. I was in Dimashq, just south of Dimashq, just as there was a strike from the United States, so yeah.
List starting to appear. The first evidence we have for a wonders list is from Callimachus of Cyrene, who lived from 305 to 240 BCE. He worked in the Library of Alexandria. I mean, what a flex. And he wrote a book called A Collection of Wonders in Lands Throughout the World. The final monuments that would make the wonders list, the Colossus of Rhodes and the Lighthouse of Alexandria, would have been created during his lifetime, with the Colossus of Rhodes finishing construction in 292 BCE and the lighthouse beginning construction in 280 BCE. So it is actually possible that all of the 7 we know of today would have been included. No copies have survived, and we have no details about it whatsoever, but we can safely assume that the publication of this would have inspired others to choose their own wonders and write about them, and they did. The first list of 7 wonder-worthy monuments that we have is from a poet called Antipater of Sidon, who was alive just over 100 years after Callimachus's death. He lists the walls and the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the statue of Zeus, the Colossus of Rhodes, the pyramids of Egypt, the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, and the Temple of Artemis. It's not quite the same list that we have today, as he swapped the Lighthouse of Alexandria for the walls of Babylon, but it's close. That means we have written evidence of the idea of the 7 wonders of the ancient world in the 2nd century BCE. That's wild. We have other lists from different people, like Philo of Byzantium, as well as other monuments that were included on other lists, like the Ishtar Gate in Babylon that was built by Nebuchadnezzar in 575 BCE. As we travel further in time into the Roman period, we have writers like the poet Martial, who added the Flavian Amphitheater, better known as the Colosseum in Rome, to his
Yeah, you were working with an NGO? Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was horrific. Like, I always tell people that, sometimes I don't necessarily like to go in depth about it, because it was kind of, oh, and hi, Yokio. I just, hello, I'm so glad you could make it to the stream today. Thank you so much for making it. I appreciate it. Kaz Rose did about the library at Alexandria. I don't think so. But yeah, it was horrible. Like, I just remember people crying and the ruined buildings. Like, that's about as in depth as I'm willing to go. It was not a fun experience, but it's never gonna go away. It's one of those things that's just with you forever. I watched a vid about the Statue Gate. I forgot what it's called, but it was on the screen. Oh, the Ishtar Gate? That's so heartbreaking. Yeah, I mean, it is. And, that's why when I hear people that are trying to, like, defend what the United States is doing in Syria, I'm just like, you don't even know what they are doing, I know you don't know, because you've literally never been there.
List in the 1st century AD in his book Liber Spectacularum, and I hope that book was spectacular. Bishop Gregory of Tours, who was born in the 6th century CE,
also Liber Spectacularum means the book of sights, or the book of things to see, right? Because spectacle, not it's like it's spectacle, you know.
added the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, and he added Noah's Ark. So you can kind of see how people's lived.
Wait, but how did they? Wait, so does that mean they knew where Noah's Ark was? I don't get that. Oh yeah, of course. Like I said, I really don't like to get into it, because it's very heartbreaking, and it's just definitely not something you want to be dwelling on for very long. Mount Error. Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, are they like, do they mean Mount Ararat, or do they mean like, oh yeah, there's some big ass boat out here and it's obviously like
experience and their values are reflected in how they created their lists. The pyramids were actually still included in early Christian lists because they were thought to be the granaries that were built by Joseph to store excess grain. So they are the like long-lasting OGs on this list. They made it through.
That is if I had a big boat, then I'd call it Noah's Ark. Yeah, pretty much. Just call it Noah's Ark and be like, oh yeah, this is the real one. If you want to take if you want to take some sketches, and clay, you have to pay me $50 or whatever. So one of the things that, yeah, literally I have an easier time talking about West Africa than the West Bank. Yes, they are poor in Ouagadougou, but damn, at least they have their farms and crops. Yeah, I mean, it's... I was seeing some pictures yesterday of what the IOF, is doing, and I saw this man who they cut. I mean, they do this all the time, and even through one of their charities, they actually do this. Through one of them is called the Jewish National Fund, and sometimes, and in fact, they've actually brought it up in American Dad, where people say, oh, they're paying to plant a tree in Israel, but a lot of times what they'll do is they will literally like get rid of a Palestinian person's trees and then plant those trees that are, for whatever, and then claim that if they do anything against those trees, that it's like, whatever. And so that's always been a big issue. This is why I've always told people, very careful when it comes to charities that say like, oh, we're going to plant trees, because it's like, okay, that's well and good, but like that one in particular, it's like they use that as a way to launder the fact that they aid in the continued colonization of Palestine. And when I saw this man who had all of his trees cut down, and the IOF was literally not even letting him pick up they were getting mad at the fact that there was all this, olive tree stuff everywhere, right? All the branches, right? And they take a long time to grow before they can be, give enough olives to be taken to market. That's one thing also people don't realize, is like, this is something that is this person's livelihood. Like, if they don't have these trees, they don't have anything, right? Like, they cannot make olives, take them to market and sell them, right? So like all those people that are like, oh, free market, it's like you literally have someone who owns the land, who was showing the Ottoman land deed that had the official stamp saying exactly the amount of land that he owns being owned in his family. And they didn't matter. So like, you'll hear, Israelis and all of that being said like, oh, well, if they just show the correct documents, then they don't care about the like, that's always a pretense, right? No, I mean, it literally literally happened yesterday. I know B'Tselem, which, is whatever, they were reporting on it, because this man, essentially, like, his family's been there for generations and and they just tore down, cut down his olive trees, and, are saying, well, since, you don't have, any more trees, I guess you can't say that you're being productive on this land anymore, like, horrific shit like that.
Through pretty much every iteration. Then in the next century CE, the Venerable Bede, man, what a name, wrote a list of his 7 wonders that was the first one to include the Lighthouse of Alexandria. The official list, as we know it today, became as famous and well known as it is thanks to the Renaissance. Dutch painter and engraver Maarten van Heemskerk was one of the first artists to depict the 7 wonders of the ancient world, along with the Colosseum as his suggested 8th wonder. And these were engraved and published by Philip Gale in 1572. Now I'm thinking that that's actually a Dutch name and be like Philip Gale. It might be that one. This seems to be the first time the official list of 7 was put together, including the lighthouse.
Yeah, Dutch names are supposed to be pronounced like, right? So like, G's are pronounced, so it's not Van Gogh or Van Gogh or whatever, it's Van Gogh. But yeah, Van Gogh. Yeah, I would move to Ouagadougou and live like a king. The Baka refugee camp, on the other hand, near the West Bank, it's an open air prison and it's the nicest one. Right, and I mean, the fact that even like a conservative British prime minister said about Gaza that it's an open air concentration camp. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, there is no other way to describe it. Like, I hate the people that try to use, and I think the book, The Holocaust Industry, and other books that are talking about how Zionists try to weaponize, right? Like, and we see this now, right, where they don't want to call things pogroms, as if pogroms were unique to Jewish people, right? And so, especially because it's Israelis doing pogroms on Palestinians, right? They don't want that to be attributed to them, because how could you, And so that's one of the things that just kind of, I mean, like I've already said, I don't suffer a Zionist ever. They just don't. They're just not allowed in my house. Like, it's not an arguable position. That's Palestine. That's their land. If you want to live there, you have that's for Palestinians to decide, right? That was not for the UN to unilaterally say, oh, we're gonna divide the land in between two peoples without informing one of them and give them, whatever. But it's so sad. And I wish that, there was more that one could do, That's the problem, is that there's so little sometimes I feel that people can do to try to support people in the West Bank and Gaza in particular, but it's just terrifying sometimes. Literally paperwork they've never seen or heard, then they'll say, oh, sorry, you never filled this out, we warned you. Yeah, they'll do that too. Where they'll say, oh, well, you were supposed to go to the Jerusalem District Court and go blah, 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 and because you didn't do that, that means your property isn't guaranteed by Israeli law, even though it's not in Israel technically. It's like, I mean, this is what they do with BIPOC people that do have ancestral land claims, right? Like, there are lots of people here that are Mexican that their families owned land, were given plots of land during like the Spanish colonial period or the short Mexican period of here in the Southwest United States. Well, in California, and like sometimes it can be they're never huge, right? Like some of the ones that were given to very wealthy families, and they're thousands of acres, but some of them are like 30 acres, and those are the ones that companies try to challenge their land claim, and it happens all my kafia. Yeah, I'm usually wearing yeah, well, I wanted to get it with the actual colors of the flag, but on the back you can see it's mostly black, but it technically does have red. But I did want to, and it's actually it's made in Philistine, right? So that was important to me as well, because I know that there are some people that they buy there just like from just like there's this company in America, I think, and they make them in like I want to say they make it in like some Southwest or some Southeast Asian country to mass produce it, because they do the same thing with shemagh, right? With the shemagh of Afghanistan, right? And like people like to wear these things. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. I love them, but I wouldn't wear it unless I had experience like you had, because I wouldn't want to offend anyone. I mean, like, there is an organization that I have worked for, Uh, oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, like I understand what you're saying, plagued by society. But I do know that like if you are willing to, like I do know that this organization I used to be a member of, particularly, well, it's more like a university one, I guess. Um, but essentially, you know, like they would have like Kafia Mondays or something like that, and like everybody that was part of that group, and it was like students for, you know, justice in Palestine, like that was one of their things to show like the unity between people, and you know, again that was a context where I guess you would perhaps feel more comfortable wearing that. Yeah. Ouagadougou, capital of Burkina Faso. If I bought one, I definitely want one that was made proper and yeah. I mean, like it's like the one that we're mentioning, Hirbiwa, and like this one is from Palestine, right? Like it's made by Palestinians, and the money went directly to them. It's the same way how I know how people can buy, you know, the Zapatista coffee, and it's not through Alex Jones. Trust me, I know he tries to sell it too for some odd reason, but like there's a way that you can also tip the farmer you know, the farmer themselves, right? I should say, and so, you know, yeah, I don't think you would offend Palestinians, but you would piss off Zionists. I mean, because they hate seeing kafia, right? They hate seeing anything associated with Palestine anywhere, and they hate things being associated with the Palestinian people that they want to claim as like inherently theirs somehow. Like I never understood that. Like Noam Chomsky, for example, grew up in a very Zionist home. I didn't, right? Like my family kind of already had like a more like had more of like, you know, like my mom was really into like Che Guevara, stuff like that. So it again, a very different home life than a lot of other people. And because I'm Mexican and Jewish, a lot of the Jewish community didn't really like care about the Mexican Jewish community because they would see us as Mexicans first, right? Like, oh, well, they're Mexicans. And then they're Jews, even though we're both at the same time. And so that, in a way, that kind of was, you know, meant that like all of the Zionist education and stuff that a lot of people get at Jewish day school, I just never had to, thankfully, never had to go through that, you know, because like literally, like it's just like straight out of like the Sabra, which it's funny too, because literally like the, you know, like the hummus Sabra, which is very, you know, which is like well known for being, you know, made in Israel or whatever by an Israeli company, and that actually comes from the word for sabrot. Sabrot means nopal, because they literally took nopales from Mexico and started to grow them in Israel, right, or occupied Palestine technically. But now Israelis claim like this is our national symbol, literally bringing something from not Palestine into Palestine, that is not native, right, is technically an invasive species, and and that's what they identify with the sabrot, right, because with this cactus, because they're like, oh, you know, because they can live in the desert. It's like, yeah, because they're from Mexico, for fuck's sake, you know what I mean? Like, it's not because like, oh, you know, they're native to the Middle East, like, but you know, okay, but yeah, I just always found that funny. Like sabra literally means nopal. Yeah, like that's what a lot of people don't know, is that like, yeah, the nopales were taken, like they went to Mexico, these people, this group of people, and they took some nopales and said, oh, well, since these grow so well in the desert, we can put them in occupied Palestine, and then they'll grow. And then now it's been several generations, right? And so now they like identify with it, but it's literally an invasive species from somewhere else. Like it's literally not meant to be grown there. obviously it's useful because it can be used for food, right? Because you can use it for food. But again, like even then, like I've never really seen people market like nopalitos or stuff like that. You know, like stuff that Mexicans use nopales for. They just use them as this kind of like symbol of desert resilience. But that's because they're from, again, the very arid climate of like northern Mexico. So, you know, there's that.
Of Alexandria. And these engravings are very fantastical and over the top. Also not the most accurate if you look at the pyramid engraving. He clearly never visited Egypt, but like many people in the Renaissance, he would have been an avid reader of ancient writing. These works went on to inspire a lot of other artists and help solidify the list of 7 as we know them today. Armed with all of that lovely background knowledge and history, let's dive right into our first wonder of the ancient world. We're going in chronological order, so first on up is the Great Pyramid of Giza. I've already done 3, count them, 3 videos on the pyramids, one about who built them, one on how they were built, and one on even debunking a bunch of ancient aliens claims about them. I've done a lot of pyramid content, folks. You could call the collection a whole scheme. Get it? Get it? So to make sure I don't repeat myself, I'm going to spit some facts that I haven't mentioned yet, as well as go over the history of the Great Pyramid, and then we're going to delve into the actual anatomy of the pyramid, which I don't think we've talked about much yet. We're going on a little tour, my friends. Ooh, how exciting. It's like we're completing the ancient Greek bucket list together. Aw, little adventure for me and my friends. Since the inception of the list of the 7 wonders, the pyramids have always held a spot, though it is the Great Pyramid built by the pharaoh Khufu that gets the most focus and attention. It's the biggest pyramid, and since this list is all about big, wondrous things, it makes sense. The Great Pyramid is also the only ancient wonder that still stands in an almost complete and recognizable form today. And it's the...
Yeah, that's true. Like almost all of the other ancient ones, I mean, like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, there's a very high chance, like ancient historians have, you know, reasoned that it's actually, you know, that it's actually was in Nineveh. So like that one, we can't necessarily prove it was there.
Oldest one to boot, built around 2500 BCE. Talk about your expert craftsmanship here. The pyramid was the epitome of kingship in ancient Egypt.
You want to be annoyed with the darkness of this vid, but I most identify with it? Oh yeah, like if you guys want to move on to something else, you guys can let me know. I don't know, I just think Raven is like, I like her energy.
Egypt. Khufu's monument was the result of a long line of development of pyramid building in Egypt. The whole thing really peaked with his pyramid and the other 2 at Giza. The practice later deteriorated, and pyramid building was eventually abandoned altogether and replaced by being buried under a natural pyramid known as the Lady of the Peak, which we know as the Valley of the Kings. Making this video, I learned that this natural rock formation was sacred to the goddess Merit Seger, which translates to she who loves silence. I love that. The pyramid shape itself.
The Seger at the end of that. So I've mentioned that Egyptian and Hebrew, right, right, they're all related languages. They're all Afro-Asiatic, or the Afro-Asiatic language family. And so Seger is related to the Hebrew word sheket, which means silence. Like if you want to, like if you're trying to tell someone to like be silent, right? You would just say sheket, sheket, sheket. Like that's also how you say shut up. Also, I mean, it means it in both senses, right? But hasheket, like the silence, and so you can see that seger, right? The G sounds in Egyptian tend to become K sounds or H sounds in Hebrew, and so that's why you can always see like seke. Or sege becomes seke and sheke, right? Because S and H in Hebrew they use the same letter, so that's why it can be, the pronunciation is usually like one or the other.
itself is also greatly tied to the worship of the sun god Ra at Heliopolis. At least the major capstone called a Benben stone, or pyramidion at the top anyways. In one of the creation myths from ancient Egypt, a mound arose from the primordial waters called the Benben, and this is where the creator god Atum settled. This is also related to the Egyptian obelisk, as we have that similar capstone at the top there. A lot of ancient cities in ancient Egypt had a similar creation story with that of this primeval mound. The original Benben stone was named after this mound and was a sacred stone in the temple of Ra at Heliopolis, as it was said that that was where the first rays of the sun fell onto the earth. And it's thought that this was the prototype for our pyramid and obelisk capstones. The Benben stone was a home to a bird deity called Bennu, who was also worshipped at Heliopolis and was linked with the sun, creation, and rebirth. This bird was probably the inspiration.
And it's very important too that like the shape, like the idea of the mound and all of that stuff, the primordial mound is something that is often not even talked about when people discuss, right, like Egyptian mythology. It's like you learn about the gods sort of, like you know, like some people kind of have like we learn about Egypt, but most of what people learn is usually from the Hellenistic period, like when Cleopatra was like queen, etc., which again I've already mentioned that Cleopatra lives closer to us in time than she does to the construction of the pyramids. Like there is more time between when Cleopatra was alive and the construction of the pyramids than between us and Cleopatra. That's a hard question to answer, but I would say somewhere between like 30-ish. But again, that's me including like unintelligible dialects, ancient languages, etc. So, because in fact, I was in Gremlo's stream earlier, and I saw someone say like, "Oh, that isn't English," and I'm just like, well, you know, I hate being so nerdy sometimes, because I'm like, oh, let me bring up how like, oh, that's, you know, in Anglo-Saxon in the year 1000, it would have been blah blah blah, you know, like. Yeah, that's why my first interview that I had for this channel was with a person who, Elise, who is her channel is Hyperpolyglotting, and she plays video games, and she'll do also like Duolingo speedruns, and so she also speaks many languages, but like my working languages are far fewer. But the point being that you know, both of us are hyperpolyglots, and you know, it's sometimes very difficult to answer that question because, you know, we can learn a language like, you know, like Sanskrit, for example, but it's not really like spoken by anyone. Same thing like learning Latin. It's like, you know, like I know it, you know, I can read stuff in it, but it's not really like, oh, I use it in daily life. So yeah. But like the one, you know, so that's the reason. That's the reason why, like, sometimes I'm like, well, what should I answer? Like, just the ones I know that I use, you know, consistently, or, you know, stuff like that. So let's see here. But yeah, I like her humor too. Like I like, one thing is like David and like I think, you know, David and Raven, I like them because they're, you know, they don't want to be too sarcastic or too, you know, which for the subject matter I think is good, you know, because I like talking about archaeology and anthropology.
For the Phoenix. I think that's pretty cool. I love a good Phoenix. I don't know about you guys. When I say the Great Pyramid is huge, I mean...
Also think about that, like this idea of this deity that is represented with this Bennu, right? That's related to the Benben stones, right, or to the Benben, you know, the capitals of the pyramids and obelisks. The fact that it's the precursor to the idea of a phoenix. So that's how old that is, right? Like it's so old, it's before the concept of the phoenix came into being. Like think about that. And the reasoning why is because again, it's related to rebirth and the sun. So like when you have those things collected, like then some of those attributes begin to merge, and that's when you begin to have the bird that's on fire, right? The phoenix itself is on fire, you know.
It was huge, okay? It covers a span of 13 acres, is 230 meters long and 146 meters high, and it consists of 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing over 2 tons on average. That's a lot. Part of the religious requirements in the Old Kingdom when the Great Pyramid was built was that the entrance is located north, facing the polar stars. The original entrance is actually just above and to the left of the modern entrance that tourists use today, which was made in the 9th century CE. This hole that we go through is known as Al-Mamun's hole because it was made by the Caliph Al-Mamun, who was the son of the very famous Harun al-Rashid. Al-Mamun made this hole while he was searching for the entrance of the pyramid to find a treasure that was supposedly inside. According to Arab accounts, a great golden cockerel and an emerald the size of a roc's egg was hidden inside the Great Pyramid. A roc is this legendary enormous bird of prey that is popular in Middle Eastern mythology. So I'm imagining an emerald like this size or something, which, I mean, yeah, that's pretty blast through a pyramid worthy if you're into that stuff. This big bird is about that size, I guess. Yeah. Oh. Archaeological and historical research believe that this tunnel wasn't completely made by Al-Mamun, as there is a report by Dionysius e Telmahario, who claimed that before Al-Mamun's expedition, a 33-meter long hole had already been made in the north face of the pyramid that was later resealed during a possible later restoration in the New Kingdom. This suggests that a robber's tunnel already existed and the Caliph cleared away the debris and just enlarged it further. Once you enter through Al-Mamun's hole and go up the ascending passageway, we have the entrance to the Grand Gallery. There's also a descent.
One thing I noticed that a lot of people... Oh. Hi, Jakar. It's so good to see you. Are you asking me that question? Because I already did my PhD coursework a long time ago. I'm done with all that. And hi, Jakar. It's so good to see you. I'm so glad you can make it to the stream today. So yeah, a lot of people, sometimes they don't know that you can actually go inside the pyramid itself, which, again, I personally have never been to Giza. I've never been to the pyramids themselves. And that's just because, again, it's difficult to travel, when you don't, when you're in. But one of the things that, again, I have read is that, yeah, that this was a robber's tunnel, right? A grave robber's tunnel that already pre-existed and was kind of like left alone because, essentially, like, they use it like, oh, like, this was like their professional, like, this was their profession. It's just that people would go in there and take things that they, stones or whatever it might have been, like, something to sell at a market, in order to get money, right? And it's like you have these huge pyramids, they're stuffed with all this stuff, they have all of these, the graves and everything, and you have all of these the mortuary temples, etc. And so people would go in there and get like, oh, I'm just going to use this as an example. It's not necessarily what was in there, but like, oh, like if there's like this small little chalice and it's like kind of like, found in the floor, then they could go and sell it and get some money and, But another thing we also have to remember too is that the pyramids that we see them now are incomplete in that the walls, the finishing walls, right, that were covered, are not the walls that would have existed in the past, because the pyramids were actually covered in a white limestone. So on top of the brown ones we see, or the very light, they're more like cream colored. There would have been white ones, another layer. And the people that try to argue that this is like a perfect structure or whatever, it's not true. It's not perfect. I mean, it's beautiful, right? I'm not trying to discount it at all. But you can see the, like, like the people try to say, like, aliens built it or whatever. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And if you go into the actual... if you actually, like, people have, taken apart parts of the walls, the outer walls, it's like you begin to reach, like, mistakes, right, by the engineers really quickly.
Passageway that goes right through the bedrock and leads to a subterranean chamber, but you can't normally go down there as a regular visitor. Though it does seem...
Yeah, you have to... Usually if people do go down there, one, they have to have permission from, like, the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and they're usually escorted by the Antiquities Police. Like, it's not something you can just go.
that it was accessible during classical antiquity, as either a Greek or Roman character was found on the ceiling of this chamber. The western half of the room is unfinished, and German archaeologist Ludwig Burckhardt suggested that this chamber was originally planned to be the burial place for Khufu, but was later abandoned for a higher chamber at the top of the Grand Gallery. Coming back up to the Grand Gallery, if you follow the passageway at the bottom of the gallery, you get to the Queen's Chamber. This room got its name from Arab explorers hundreds of years ago, but research into it shows that it wasn't meant to be a burial chamber for a queen. The chamber is made of limestone and has a gabled ceiling.
I hate when people say aliens built it. They used only torches to see inside. How did they do that? Oh, so well, for one, when they were constructing the pyramid, remember they would have started in stages. So like as they would have been building it up, when they got to specific levels, when they started building these like this, right? Everything would have been like, it's not like they built the outer shape first and then built the inside. They built it as they were building it up around it, right? So that's why like you have these chambers that go like multiple stories up, because as they were making, you know, the higher and higher rows of the pyramid itself, they were also constructing those those other chambers, and so that's why they wouldn't have necessarily needed torches to go inside. Obviously afterward, yes, they probably would have done that. So they would have had torches, but again, you know, like the entrance that was there, the official entrance that's there, was a grand entrance. So it would have allowed for lots of oxygen to be in there. So because one of the things too is we have to remember that the mortuary temple is just outside of the pyramid. So the connection between the grave itself, right, the mausoleum and the mortuary temple would have been one that required propitiations and other things to be done in relation to going inside the pyramid, etc.
There aren't any inscriptions on the walls, but there is a corbelled niche in the east wall that's about 4.5 meters tall. 2 shafts were discovered on the north and south walls of the chamber going up through the pyramid, but not completely reaching the outside. No one really knows their purpose, but inside one shaft, Weinman Dixon discovered a stone sphere, a wooden slab, and a copper object in the shape of a swallow's tail that is referred to as a hook in 1872. These objects were lost until the ball and the hook were rediscovered in the collection storage at the British Museum, and the piece of wood was recently found at the University of Aberdeen. Can you imagine?
So one thing that keeps happening, and this is something that even happens at the Cairo Museum, at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. This even happens in the in the Museo Nacional de Antropología in Mexico. It happens all over the place, but I'm trying to say it's ubiquitous. It's not like, it doesn't happen everywhere. But the amount of stuff that the British Museum has, right? The Louvre, the British Museum, the main anthropological museums or history museums, the Geschichtliches Museum in Berlin, etc. Like, the amount of stuff that they have is so large that they, for many reasons, right? That when they actually do lose stuff, right? And now some people will say, oh, they do it on purpose, or they do it, I'm not going to get into that discussion because I don't think that's necessary. But like, there are so many things that people just do not know what's there because, again, like, their storerooms are filled with so much stuff from all over the world that, like, even the museums here in the United States as well, for example, like, that sometimes things get lost and get rediscovered, decades apart. Or sometimes something completely new is discovered within the things that the museum already has. And so that's why, like, now a lot of the museums are trying to really look at their collections and try to catalog them as much as possible, precisely because they want to try to see if they can find more of these, like, my adoptive mom used to work at a college that had a large museum department. The amount of times that she got called late in the afternoon or weekends because something went missing and was alarming to me as a child, and I just remember as an adult, and I'm disturbed. She was the dean of student services, for God's sake. These were student pranks. Oh, yeah. And that's another thing too, is that how these things are preserved is also really important, because again, like one reason why one reason why a lot of these museums will put them in storerooms and is one, because they don't realize its significance, but also because they just, like kind of like what you're saying, like that will people who work there as interns will like randomly find something really important, a pile of stuff that hasn't even been taken care of and touched. Yeah, like there's like that. Or the interns will put stuff in the storeroom because they're told to, right? And they don't know that they're like mixing up stuff that would have otherwise, right? Like, again, this is why, like, when we're talking about archaeology, like, this is why keeping, African art, oh my goodness gracious. Yeah, that's, I mean, it's the same way in the United States, like, where, like, there have been, like, museums that, essentially got, like, their Mesoamerican, collections, like, really important things that were sometimes even on loan, like stolen or lost or whatever, and then they just like replace it with like a copy, but it's like it's not the same, like, find the actual thing, right? Like I used to consider going to school to learn how to preserve artifacts properly because the school near me has an excellent program, but I never ended up doing it. But it's something I wish I was taught more. Oh yeah, I mean, I would say one thing. You definitely don't have to feel that you can't go to such a program now. Like, I definitely don't think people should feel, like, oh, it's too late, right? I think that if you want to do it, you should do it. But, again, I'm not saying that to you particularly. I'm saying in general. She had to bring it up to the house for the rest of the time it was loaned to keep it safe. That part, yeah, that's cool. But, like, I know people who, like, have... rather, I don't know them personally, but like I used to know this woman that once, as I've already mentioned, I used to teach French, and one of the things was that like when you go to her house, like she was very wealthy and would travel all, like it looked like a museum because it was like packed with all of this stuff, and I'm just like, I wonder how on earth she was able to keep all of this stuff, right? Because like there's stuff in here that I'm like, this looks like, like museum, like a museum would have this or something. But, for her, it's just like, oh, this is just to make my house look nice, and I'm just like, these are actual artifacts from all these places all around the world. And to you, and I understand that, decor and all of that stuff, but like, that's all she sort of saw them as, was like, oh, like, this is like where I have stuff from when I visited Egypt, and this is stuff from when I visited, South Africa, and this is... So, yeah, I have a back and forth love-hate relationship with trying to finish my bachelor's degree. I'm 44 now. Oh, well, I mean, I get that. Like, I'm not... That's why I'm saying, like, I'm not necessarily trying to, like, trying to convince you, like, oh, yeah, you need to go back. But I definitely think that, like, I know that at certain universities, especially in California, again, that's what I would know best, but, like, at other museums, university museums, they will often have classes because they have citizen archaeologists, citizen scientists that they need to track, to help them. Because, I mean, like, some archaeological digs are so big, like, you have to try to get people that are actually interested and teach them those things, right? Teach them the skills to do that. And so, okay, yeah, so, yeah, like, at, like, I'm trying to think at, like, UCSD in San Diego, NorCal, okay. So, like, an example would probably be, like, Berkeley, right? Like, another one would probably be, like, UC Davis. That's actually the one that comes to mind first, is UC Davis. I know because I used to know someone that worked in the biology department, and, like, the whole thing was that they would use her expertise in order to make sure that they were preserving, right, when we're talking about context, right, which is looking at the stratum in which something is found, when you're digging somewhere, what to do when it comes to, like, marine archaeology or, things like that. The Field Museum here in Chicago was getting ready to display these replica swords for an exhibit and found out they accidentally mislabeled an authentic sword as a replica. Ooh. Oh my gosh, that's sad. But I mean, I guess I can see how it can happen, right? Like, I can see, like, if there are multiple items and they all look the same, right? But most museums probably are filled with, yeah, I mean, most museums are filled with mostly stolen artifacts. Like the British Museum, I mean, that's why most of them are in storerooms, because if they were to bring all, I mean, one, they can't fit all of them, but like when they do certain exhibits, like, oh, we're going to look at, Nilotic cultures, right? And they bring in all of these things. It's like, oh yeah, they're property of the British Museum, but it's like, how did the British Museum come to own X thing, right? And a lot of it is just like, oh, in the 1800s, some British, generals just decided to go and, they decided to go visit. They decided to go visit Egypt and, just got really interested in the culture. I could spend hours going on about my childhood vacation. We went to places and then would buy and take things. Oh, yeah, I see that. Like that massive diamond on Lizzie's ex-crown. Oh, yes. That one, which was taken from the peacock throne of the Mughals in India, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you look at what the stand, I guess, or like the stone platform under which the peacock throne would have been constructed around, right? Because obviously it needed to be above. Like, it looks nothing like how it's ever been described, because everything's been taken away. Like all of the tiles, all of the, everything is completely devoid now. It's just the bare stone. Yeah, went places and they would buy and take things. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and that's all. And that's actually a big problem when it comes to a lot of places that are archaeological sites in the United States, is that, like, because, unless you go inside the tourist center and you actually, get told by someone, don't do this or whatever, or, or the signs, it's like people like to take arrowheads and so many other things, right? Among, like, I've seen people that were, like, arrested for having pottery shards, right? And it's like, bro, like, it's like, this is a protected area. You can't just take whatever the fuck you want just because you think it's cool. Like, you can't do that, right? And, but people feel like this entitlement to it. Mostly when, again, when I've gone to these places and I've even had other friends go, it's like, it's so obvious, like, we're not gonna disturb this place, right? Like, it belongs here, right? It belongs to this ground, right? And it's just, like, it angers me, but I try not to get, like, at this point, I'm just constantly disappointed by people. Like, even people that are, like, ancient historians or historians in general, it's like, they will go out and do stuff like that. Like, or, like, accidentally take something out of its context and be like, oops, I didn't mean, like, I can see if it's a mistake, but the person I'm thinking about does this mistake a lot. Like, a lot. I get interested in hearing about exploitation tourism too, because, like you said, you don't want to ignore that these colonialisms happened, and this is the type of stuff that happens. Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why it's like I say, like, if you're gonna visit Egypt or if you're gonna visit these places, don't just visit the touristy places. You should visit, you should see, right? The other things that should be preserved for historical purposes, right? In particular, those, like, for example, I mean, like, Lenin writes this in Imperialism, the High Stage of Capitalism, for example. He's talking about how they turned Egypt into a plantation economy in some places on the River Nile, because they wanted to be able to outdo Russia's cotton production. And now this actually is also a reason why, because of Egyptian cotton, that Britain did not side with the Confederacy during the Civil War, because they started, but it doesn't mean, however, that's a good thing, right? Obviously, both things are bad, but one of the things that becomes very apparent is that because Russia was able to have a monopoly of the cotton grown in Turkestan, it was able to compete against, and again, this goes into the mechanics of imperialism. That's why the rush for colonies and the carving up of the world, right, is really important to keep in mind. Like, like, why is it that, a lot of museums in, the imperialist powers, right, like in this case, I'm just going to use the example of Russia. Not that I want to focus on Russia itself, but just using them as an example. They made sure to try to take artifacts that were on the Ukrainian steppe and bring them into for Russian museums, right? And of course, that's that part of Russia, like Rostov na Donu, right? Like that area is obviously related culturally and everything, right? Geographically, but they did it specifically because they wanted to take away, evidence of there being like an independent culture within what is now the boundaries of Ukraine. And this is a whole different thing. Like, I don't really, this isn't trying to get into the whole war thing, but it's like, they used it as a way to say, well, we're preserving Russian history by going in there and taking away these Scythian hair combs and all of these things, and instead putting them in a Russian museum in Moscow. And it's like, here we have it again, where it's like, now there are many sites and many objects, right, many artifacts that we don't know that we'll ever see them again, because of the war and because of all of this. And you see that this is one of those things that kind of goes alongside with colonialism and imperialism, is this desire to have these artifacts and put things, take things back to the imperial core, pretty much. My dad can be an idiot, and the sign will say it, and it's like he can't read. I mean, it's like, like, I understand that some people, it's like, oh, I want to have something cool, but it's just like, there are things that you could buy, right? Like at the, like, that have been, already processed. And oh, thank you so much for the 200 bits. What, JJ, thank you. I appreciate it. But, it's, you do not want it to become a habit, right? Like that, it should not be normalized that, every time that you go to, a national park or to a national monument, that like, oh, if there's some kind of, if there's some kind of, artifact, and I happen to, oh, I'm going to pick it up, I'm going to take it home, take it out of its context, because then that's going to affect the potential for archaeologists and anthropologists to actually understand what happened in that particular place, right? Even if there's nothing you can buy, why does there have to be something? Right. I mean, I was just saying that as a, I agree with you, Jilly. There doesn't need necessarily to be something for you to buy, but I do think that it's like even when the option presents itself, where they could purchase X thing, right? They don't want that, right? They want to go out there in the field and instead take it out of its context. And then that harms further study, because archaeologists need to find things within the context that they're in. And as soon as they're moved around, and, it can really affect the interpretation of those sites. And so it's like, and I agree with you, like, there doesn't need to be something that you should buy. But I just know that there are many sites where like they will sell like either recreated, like they're not like that are not really historical, but they're meant to look historical, right? And that's typically what I've seen.
Imagine what else might be in those collections. Like, gosh. Since the 90s, researchers have been sending cameras and robots up these shafts, and they discovered that they are blocked by some sort of limestone door with two copper handles of sorts. A small hole was drilled into the southern door, and on the latest expedition, they were able to see inside a small chamber that was behind it, which had hieroglyphics written in red paint. They were also able to look at the backside of this limestone door and saw that the stone was polished, suggesting that it had a specific reason, and it wasn't just to block the shaft off from debris. And the copper handles were also determined to be just decorative. Gosh, the attention to detail in this place is wild. Also,
oh yeah, the attention to detail is like, wow. Let's see here. What is the biggest find you've seen someone take? Me personally, I think when I say this, that they took, it's not as though they got away with it. I'll put it like that. They thankfully did not get away with it. But it was in Mexico, and they thought that they could get away with it for reasons. And so, and there was actually a small little, like a little, like it was like these like clay things that were from an indigenous culture that at one point, so the point where we were at, there had once been lakes, right? There were once lakes, and so now that they had dried out, you could find a lot of evidence of previous cultures, pre-Hispanic cultures that existed in that region that already had, had developed like pottery, etc., and also were tied to the pantheon of the Purapechas, for example, who are mostly in Michoacan. And when they found like a little, it was like a little, how do I describe it? It was like these little jarrito, like I'm trying to think of the word. It's like a little jug, I guess, made out of clay that's like has decoration on it. Obviously it was very faded because it's very old. But I saw that someone was trying to take those because they had found like a whole bunch of them. And they said, well, because there are so many, if I take one, like that was their reasoning. Oh, you don't really need so many. You just need one or two, right? And it's like, no, like all of them are important, right? Like they're all historical artifacts. And they were actually kind of like proud about it, like, oh yeah, I took one of these things. But thankfully they got, caught, and it was just so dumb because, because again, it was of a very small pre-Hispanic people group that essentially lived in the borderlands between the Aztec Empire and the Purepecha Empire, which was independent of the Aztecs. So it would have been, a place where there would have been lots of migrations back and forth because of warfare between the two entities, right? The Aztec and the Purepecha Empire. So because of that, you were able to find like very thin layers, strata that had, like, oh, this city was built. It was, then there was a war between the two empires, and then they rebuilt it again, and then, so that's one that I remember that like they were like it was something that. And the reason why it was so important is because they were very well preserved. And had they taken them, like, again, it would have taken them away from their other jarros, right? Their other jugs that are made out of a specific type of clay that, we can track to, like one of the things that they used these artifacts to show was that it was the trade that was going on between the Purapechas and the peoples, the other Nahua peoples, and the Huichol people that live in northern Jalisco. And by showing that, they were able to show that through the clay itself. Like, even the clay came through the trade that occurred. And they, like I said, like, if they would have taken, like, one of them away, maybe to him, it wouldn't have seemed that important. But it was important because every single one of them. I saw this lady take the whole Eiffel Tower. Her name was Carmen Sevilla. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I forget. I don't know why, but I'm forgetting. Like, originally the Eiffel Tower was going to be built somewhere else. Was it going to be London or something? I forget where, but they were going to build it in some other city, and they were like, no, we don't want it. And, like, nobody wanted the Eiffel Tower. In fact, I remember the Guy de Maupassant, the French writer, was so French, I guess, that he actually was, he hated the Eiffel Tower so much that the only place that he could eat, or, that he could go to a restaurant and not have to see it, was the Eiffel Tower's restaurant. Which I'm just like, bro, like, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, I get it, you hate it, but like this, like, just sit facing the other direction, you know what I mean? But they have to look out the window and be all philosophical and blah, blah, blah. And so, like, he's like, oh, everywhere I go, all I see is the Eiffel Tower. I don't want to see it when I go about my day, And so that's pretty much why he would only eat at that one restaurant, the Eiffel Tower restaurant, because he didn't want to see the Eiffel Tower, but he was eating there. Which, I mean, I'm like, I feel that's worse. I don't know, just like, because then you're paying for it to stay, you know? Like, I don't know.
Oh my gosh, we know so much about the Great Pyramid, and yet so many things still elude us. Ah, I love it. Now, finally, you've heard the term enough times in this video, let's talk about the Grand Gallery. This large space inside the Great Pyramid continues on the same slope as the ascending passage and leads to the King's Chamber. This thing is absolutely show-stopping. I got to see it without anyone else in it because I was visiting during a very quiet time, and I stupidly never took any pictures, but oh my god, it was one of the most amazing things that I've ever seen in my life. The gallery is made out of 7 layers of massive stone blocks that are corbelled inwards.
So I want to make sure that he sounds just like my ex. Oh yeah, the Guy de Maupassant. Oh yeah. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire? But yeah, I want to make sure people can get to see this, right? Like, when you go visit the pyramids, right, you, again, because you can actually go inside, you can see all of this, and you can see all of the very, you know, the work that went into this. But one thing I have to please just stay within these things. Just like I know people want to touch things, but like at the same time, I'm like, just don't touch things, right? Like, just leave it alone. Please, like, just leave it alone. Like, I have no problem with people, you know, being curious and whatever, but like, unless there's a part where it's like, okay, yeah, you can touch, like, the amount of damage that can be done just because of the oils that the human hand has, you know, and other things, it just, the humidity, etc., like, cause a lot of problems. Yeah, the French, yeah.
At the top, it's only 1 meter wide. The Grand Gallery also consists of a shelf or step on either side, and in these shelves are 56 slots, 28 on each side, with 25 niches cut above the slots into each wall of the gallery. The purpose of these slots isn't known, but the central gutter that's in the floor of the Grand Gallery is the same width as the ascending passage. This has led to people speculating that the stones used for blocking the passage off and sealing the burial chamber were stored here, and then the slots held wooden beams to hold them in place above the floor to allow the funeral to take place. After the priests left, the workmen stayed behind to knock down the wooden beams to let these huge granite slabs slide into place and block the entrance. Don't you worry about the workmen though. They had an escape route. They got out via a narrow shaft that led from underneath a stone in the upper corridor at the top of the gallery down through the pyramid into the lower corridor. At the top of the Grand Gallery, we get to the antechamber, the last line of defense against a robbery. Man, this thing was a fortress. It was designed to house more blocking stones to protect the entrance to the burial chamber. But alas, even the best laid plans can fail, and it didn't prevent any robberies. More on that later though. Through the antechamber, we finally get to the pièce de résistance, the King's Chamber. This chamber is made entirely of granite and is where Pharaoh Khufu would have been laid to rest. There aren't inscriptions inside this chamber, and the only object inside is a sarcophagus which was hollowed out of one giant.
So one thing we also have to, they need to go to the kiddies corner at the Discovery Center. The touch and feel exhibit, yeah. But like, yeah, I mean, like, I understand people's desire to touch things, right? But like, you know, there are parts where it's like, you know, it doesn't matter, but just, you have to be, again, the oils and other things you have in your hand do not help the preservation of the stone, which again is, you know, it's been thousands of years, granted, I will grant you that, but, you know, the amount of degradation that's happened in modern history is just like insane. But one thing to keep in mind is when you do enter the King's Chamber, you will not see hieroglyphics. Now, people might be, wait a second, I thought that, you know, when you went to go see the pyramids, you know, when you're inside of they didn't do that until the early Middle Kingdom. Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that you're learning so much. I'm glad. So that's one of the things, is that like, multitasking can be fun sometimes. Like if you have something like cool to listen to, or so again, the thing to consider is that, of course, when you enter the King's Chamber, people expect there to be a lot of hieroglyphics, but they didn't do that until much later on in history. So that's the reason why, like, this was done during the old kingdom, and they still hadn't started that practice, which is why it looks very bare. But it's the way how people think of it is something that would have happened, especially in the King's Chamber. It's because it was built in the Old Kingdom, and it wasn't until the Middle Kingdom where they really started to do like the hieroglyphics within. One thing too is we have to remember that the king had a mortuary temple, right? Like a temple for that pharaoh outside of the pyramid where they would have done the sacrifices or whatever. So if they would have put hieroglyphics, at least back then, it would have made more sense to put it in the mortuary temple, which is separate, where people, where priests could actually go, than to put it in the site that was never going to be seen again, right? And at least in this case. And again, unfortunately, none of the defenses held up against grave robbers very well, mainly because, a lot of it was just, as long as you can get enough guys or whatever to like move the stone or find a way to like, get into the stone, right, by like reducing it down, right, chiseling at it or whatever, then you could go into more and more parts of the pyramid. Whereas the two shafts that were discovered, like, the reason why those are pretty much undisturbed is because, it really wasn't until modern time, but that we noticed this, but like getting there is very difficult. And also, again, they're like placed at very strange angles. Like you have to go like crawling essentially all the way up. So it's not like a fun adventure.
Giant piece of granite. When it was rediscovered in the early Middle Ages, it was already broken open and all of the contents inside were missing. What's wild to me is that the sarcophagus is too big to fit around the corner between the ascending and descending passages, so it must have been put into place in this chamber before the roof was put on, which is like very smart planning. The King's Chamber also has
Right, exactly. And that's what I was trying to say earlier, is like, as they were building the pyramid, right, as they were doing the outer work, then that they would do platforms, and then they would work on the levels of the platform up to these levels, and as well, besides digging into the bedrock as well. So so that's why we know from Khufu's pyramid that which is the biggest one, that's why we know that the roof was not installed until the actual granite stone, which it's funny because granite is what they try to say, like, oh, there's no way the Egyptians could have done this, but like the Egyptians already had like a 1,000-year history working with granite. So it doesn't make any sense when they try to say like, oh, like, the Egyptians didn't have the technology for it. It's like the Egyptians, even before they started building the pyramids, had the technology to do it. It's just, but so they did this, and it's a very tall, like, the main chamber is here, but they have other things before you reach the top of the little canopy. Well, at least that's what I call it, the canopy, but the roof that it has. So again, they placed these granite blocks here and had it done when they were at this stage of the construction. So again, like these entrances that we have, like the current entrance, were things that like were thought of as and were installed as the pyramid was being built.
two narrow shafts in the north and south walls, similar to those in the Queen's Chamber. We aren't sure if these ones originally penetrated the outer casing of the pyramid, and we also don't know what their purpose was. For a while, Egyptologists thought they could be ventilation shafts, but then, of course, in true archaeological style, with all things that we don't understand the purpose of, we decided it was probably for a ritualistic purpose. Aren't we just predictable little boogers, eh? Above the King's Chamber are 5 relieving chambers that were probably for relieving the pressure of all that pyramid stone on top of the ceiling and preventing it from caving in on itself. Hence the name relieving chambers. I'm gonna stop saying relieving now. All of them are flat except for the top one that has a cute little pointed roof. Again, this is more for weight distribution and strength. They've found
So again, like that's what's super, super important. Oh good, you just got done filing taxes. That's good that you got it done now. I mean, it's almost tax day. What time period, like before 3000 BCE, is that too far, not far? Oh, okay. people are racist. What is that in response to? What is that in response to them saying like, oh, it must be ritualistic? JJ? Or is that to them saying that aliens built it? I mean, one of the things is like the reason why the people that thought it was ventilation shafts, like it kind of makes sense. Because the Romans would all feel connected when they go to the baths, but Carthage had running hot water is impressive. Oh yeah, of course. Like, I mean, it's like I said, like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, I mean, it's the same thing like with like when people like to look at the ancient civilizations, right? The first civilizations, like people like to hold up Athens and Rome, which I'm not saying that they shouldn't be interested in them, but like particularly when they look at ancient Athens and they try to act like it was always 5th century BCE, right? And it wasn't. Like most of the time that Athens existed, it was just like stone built houses in a small little village setting of lots of and then some of those families became very important because they were landowners, etc. But like they didn't have plumbing, they didn't have all of that stuff. Whereas in a much older civilization, right, in 6,000 years ago, or more, right, in this case, you had the Indus Valley River civilization or the Harappan civilization, and they already had personal bathrooms, like even on the second story of a house, right, like they had personal bathrooms. And and every city was planned out so that it would get its allotment of water, and it would have water to irrigate, but also water to, and there were no, from what we know now. Are they not all showing up? Huh, that's weird.
Found a bunch of graffiti made in red ochre paint that was made by the workmen in these areas. You can see the leveling lines and the names of the work gangs who were building this pyramid. Graffiti is such an ancient thing, and I am obsessed with it. I love that we've always wanted to leave our mark on things. It's so nice. Now I know everyone in the comments would be popping off if I didn't mention the 2 mystery spaces that were recently found inside the pyramid, so here we go. In 2017, scientists from the Scan Pyramids project discovered a large void above the Grand Gallery using muon radiography, and they called it the Big Void. Very fitting. It's at least 30 meters long, and its cross-section is similar to that of the Grand Gallery. We don't know what the Big Void was for, and it's not accessible, so we can't get to it right now. It was suggested that it could have been used for the construction of the Grand Gallery, but the research team has said that it's completely different from the construction spaces that have been previously identified in this pyramid. So that means, oh yes, another mystery that all the Ancient Aliens fans are coming out of the woodwork for. And I need to say it, I'm gonna say it again, it wasn't alien. It just wasn't. And
Yes, it was not aliens. I'm obsessed with graffitis. The Carthaginians had running hot water baths in each person. So yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, they like to, extol like the Middle Ages and other things, like the Vikings, and it's like the Viking, which, again, the Vikings weren't really a people, it was a thing that people did. I have a hard time keeping track of the global timeline happening, things such as running water, etc. I mean, like, well, see, the thing is that, like, some places developed things like running water really early on, like in the Harappan civilization, but then they, like, that civilization essentially had a huge migration out of those cities. They believe due to climate, with changes to the river, right? And so because of that, they most likely moved into what is now, the modern state of India, right? Because the Harappan civilization sort of is all of the Indus River Valley and the Saraswati River, which used to exist, and so then that's when you see more people moving into the rest of the Indo-Gangetic plain, and then into the rest of India. And some people have speculated Rome crushed Carthage not once but twice, and then they came back and toward the they wanted to eliminate that civilization completely off the face of the earth. And it's very strange because it's like it's very strange to me that they wanted to do it in such a total way. And people say, oh, it's because, they were the only empire that could, you know, affronted them that ever got. I mean, Hannibal was you know, winning battles in Italy. You know, it would have just been a, you know, had and an interesting thing too is Hannibal kept to the treaty, right? That's one of the reasons why he was so lost. That is because the Romans said, in the treaty it says Carthage cannot rebuild its navy, blah blah blah, and Hannibal kept to that. Whereas the Romans didn't. Like, they were like, oh no, we're gonna have a navy, we're gonna do all the things we say we're not gonna do. And so yeah, it was a very different society. Also, there was much less food scarcity in Carthage because that area, which is now, you know, like Tunisia, eventually became known as the breadbasket of Rome, because of the fact that it was able to grow large areas of that region grow wheat very well, and that was again what allowed it to not have as much food scarcity as they did in Rome, which had food scarcity also for the fact that it was a slave economy. So, you know, there was an accumulation of goods in certain places, whilst in places where they would grow, they would often have food shortages, and it's just kind of ridiculous. I mean, it's like capitalism now, right? Like, you can see the contradictions of each prior form of you know. Oh yeah, I love Tunisia a lot too. It's sad that they can't have you know, but I mean imperialism is just yeah, no, I know what you mean, like Lebanon or, you know, Syria, Turkey, etc. Like, you know, I mean, I'm just naming other places in the Mediterranean, but like, you know, even if you look at places like in Asia, right, like Tajikistan, etc. Like, it's beautiful, and you know, I would love to visit Tajikistan because I speak Dari. I speak the Afghan version of Farsi, but you know, and it's mutually. Well, Tajik is also like Farsi. They're all the same similar language as such, but just different dialects of it. And so yeah, and again, like the people that say like Rome could have lasted forever, it's like, I mean, even under the Roman Imperium, right? Like, even under that period, it was never like this. Like, the Pax Romana is just like something people made up in retrospect. It's not like, oh yes, like we want to create like, for example, like the Romans never won against the Parthians, but it didn't mean that like Parthia got any great benefit from, you know, when Rome did take over some of its western provinces, right? Like, they didn't. So.
This news came out literally like a week and a half ago at the time that I'm filming this, so not when it's coming out, but a new 9-meter long chamber was discovered above the main entrance to the pyramid. This is so much cooler than the big void, in my opinion, because we have photographic confirmed proof of what's there. That's all that's been said really up until now, and a lot more research needs to be done.
Yeah, and Scipio Africanus he wanted power as well to prove a point that he could be a good young general, maybe one day leader of Rome. Yeah. I mean, you know, like, that's the reason why I never understood why there are so many examples of Rome where they were just like, you know, they would rather do that than, you know, but it is what it is, sadly. And what I mean by saying it is what it is just the fact that, like, in retrospect, you know, all we can be is like, what a horror, right? Like, it's just horrific.
But boy, it just goes to show you that you may think you know something even after hundreds of years of research, thousands if you count the writings of Herodotus and other ancient scholars, but nope, There can always be a surprise. And I love that. I love that about archaeology. The Great Pyramid of Giza was the tallest building in the world for over 3,000 years until Old St. Paul's Cathedral was constructed in the 1200s CE. It was already 2,000 years old when Herodotus was said to have visited, and by that time he said it had already been robbed. And it was, probably around 2300 BCE or in the Middle Kingdom. But then that entrance was eventually covered with rubble, which is why Caliph Al-Mamun had to make his new one. Raven, tell me more about this ancient entrance. Okay, I will. Strabo, who lived around 64 BCE to 21 CE, wrote about the pyramid, which he mentioned as one of the 7 wonders of the world. And he said that high up, approximately midway between the sides, it has a movable stone. And when this is raised up, there is a sloping passage to the vault. Say what now, Strabo? A flap door to enter the pyramid? Oh my god, that is so wild. So that means maybe the original entrance through the original limestone casing was disguised to blend in with the rest of the pyramid. And it just was like a little flap door. Oh my god, I love it. At the time the ancient writers were visiting the pyramid, it would have had most of this limestone casing intact. This wouldn't have been mostly removed until an earthquake in the 1300s, which loosened a lot of the casing stones, and they were later removed in the same century by the Sultan to build mosques and forts in medieval Cairo. More casing stones were removed in the 1800s by Muhammad Ali Pasha to build the Alabaster Mosque in Cairo as well. There is still some left intact on the pyramid, and one block on display at the British Museum. Of course, it's there. Where else would it be? I could go even...
I mean, like, when she says, of course it would be, it's like, yeah, like, the British Museum, they have, like, the British Museum literally has artifacts that come from, like, every culture that's, like, you know, it's like any culture that exists, it's like the British somehow found a way to, like, get artifacts from it. I'm not going to question, I'm not going to bring up their methods, but it's just, like, it's just ridiculous to me how, like, literally everything, like, they have it, and sometimes it's, like, the only thing that we have of, okay, let me see here. There's a part, so it talks about what portion of early Roman history we can trust, kind of like what she's talking about with the pyramids. Yeah. So, I mean, like, Strabo, again, like, Strabo was just a traveler who mentioned this, and, I mean, the main thing was that there was corroboration, right? That's the thing when it comes to history, is that if there are other writers, and for the most part there were other people that mentioned this, because when you go to the like whether the entrance functioned as Strabo describes it, and the way how Raven describes it, are two different things, right? But we do know that the entrance was about halfway up. And you can see that it was an entrance because it actually had, like, a pediment, almost like when you have columns, right? And you have a pediment at the top, right? The triangle thing. That's what a pediment is. And so that's how we know that's where the entrance was. And that's about halfway up. And it makes sense considering that, again, the chambers are so high up in the pyramid itself. Whereas initially, the other entrance that would have been created would have gone down into the bedrock, but they decided not to go with that. So that's...
Further into the entire pyramid complex, the Queen's Pyramids, the boat pits, and the workers' village that was found nearby. But then this video would be like an hour long, and we still have 6 wonders left to explore. Needless to say, the Great Pyramid of Giza has and always will continue to invoke wonder into everyone who as much as sees a photo of them.
So, and one thing I also wanted to mention was Old St. Paul's Cathedral. Like what I think Raven is also what is being mentioned here is like, so the St. Peter's Basilica that we see now, right, in Rome, is not the original one, right? Like it's instead the one that was constructed, again during the Renaissance, by the architect, by different people, but like mainly it was Michelangelo, because not only was he, doing a lot of those things, but was also in charge of the architectural project that consisted of that. And so that is, one of the things that that we also have to keep in mind too, is that I'm going to play some Cetera while I'm just talking about this. So, oops, Hidalgo's there. Michoacán, Potosí, Baja California, Coahuila. And so that's one of the things we have to keep in mind is the fact that because of the corroboration we have with historians across this, we do know that one, like as I was mentioning earlier, that was the entrance. But also, this is why we also need to be very critical about the people that want to take, like people like what's his name, Herodotus, like on his word. Like again, most of his stories, I'm not even joking, are like, this dude from Egypt told me this, so and that's literally like where he gets so many of his stories, right? And I think that that is something that people often forget. It's like he literally is just like, yeah, some dude told me this and it must be true because he's from here. And, obviously we can tell that that's not, the best, historical method. But again, it was, and it also was before history as we know it became, the process of history was, really centered as it is now. Yes. Okay, so I'm thinking that I probably have to start getting ready, actually, to go to let's see here, to go take my puppy to go get So what we're going to do is we are going to raid US A-hole. And thank you guys and everyone so much for coming to the stream today. I really appreciate it. I hope that all of you go with to go see US A-hole, and I will see everyone very soon. I just have to go take care of my puppies today. Love everyone. Bye.